No, because I'm gonna get him.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the Hagman Report. It is a Thursday, August 10th, 2017. Did you ever think we would see the day where we have a special prosecutor, or I should say more accurately, an independent counsel that is engaged in psychological operations, optics, the optics of political terrorism, I will say. Robert Mueller himself, acting in violation of 28 CFR 45.2, as in the capacity of an independent counsel, where he's actually a prosecutor, a witness, and an investigator. You can't do that. Now, we saw on July 25th of this year, White House Special Counsel, the independent counsel had requested the presence and received the presence of Paul Manafort. That's right, Paul Manafort appeared before independent counsel, volunteered information documents, everything that they asked for. Less than 24 hours later, in a pre-dawn raid, we're finding out through through very interesting leaks. A pre-dawn raid took place at his home in a show of force, psychological, optic show of force, and in the execution of a warrant. And now, of course, we are seeing a coup take place, and this is part of the coup. And Paul Manafort is what they're attempting to do here. Is a couple of things. The deep state is at war with Donald Trump. They want to take down Donald Trump at whatever, by any means necessary. So they're going after Paul Manafort, his business dealings, his financial dealings. This beyond the one-page, single-page, 2-point mandate of the Special Independent Counsel, far beyond that mandate, and investigating things that have little to do, or have actually that Mueller has no authority in doing, going after Paul Manafort in this fashion. What they had to do, essentially, and think about this, within the period between the end of that meeting between Paul Manafort and the independent counsel, between between the end of that meeting and the end of the day, or at some point before that pre-dawn raid, they had to find a federal judge. They had to go to convince a federal judge that a crime was possible, that a crime existed. They had to provide probable cause for the potential destruction of evidence, and convince the judge that in so doing, of course, there would be a crime committed, in order to get the judge to sign off on the warrant. That is, of course, unless the judge was an appointee by Barack Hussein Obama, which obviously in this particular area of federal district court he would be. They're going after Paul Manafort for foreign banking, for violations, alleged for violations of the Foreign Banking Act, foreign agents, and they're attempting to squeeze him to get to Donald Trump. And again, this is all outside of the mandate. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, Samantha Power, all of these people, Imran Awan, for the most part, walking away without any type of with the exception of Imran Awan, who was arrested, but the rest, of course, and all of the swamp dwellers, nothing against these people. No filings, no, as far as we know, no grand jury investigation, no warrants, no seizure of any equipment, again, on behalf of admitted criminal activity, those who have engaged in criminal activity, Hillary Clinton And James Comey said as much, by the way, obviously, on July 5th of 2016. But the bottom line here is the war of optics is heating up. This is very serious. I addressed a lot of this morning, 9 to 10, and I would urge everyone, if you haven't listened to my investigative hour this morning from 9 to 10, please do so, as well as John and Joe's program between 2 and 3. We've got we've got 3 different programs that run during the course of the day, 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern. That's our Hagmann Report, my show from 9 to 10, and Joe and John's show from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And the subject of my show, of course, and by extension, this show tonight, is the coup and concurrent civil war in this country. We are engaged in a cold civil war right now. We are also witnessing a historical coup take place, and we are seeing the do-nothing Republicans, the GOP establishment, essentially back Paul Manafort, essentially back these people who are criminals or who are hands off of the criminals, the actual criminals. This Paul Manafort issue is deadly serious, extremely serious, if you understand what happened here. So a federal judge had to sign off on a warrant, a pre-dawn raid. Think about that, that flash bang of a grenade. Not saying they used one, of course, but when you have a pre-dawn raid, that's pretty damn. So that's about as serious as it gets, and that is, again, nothing but a brute show of force, and I certainly believe totally unnecessary given the fact that he was cooperating. What about the smashed hard drives, multiple hard drives of Hillary Rodham Clinton found, or I'm sorry, of the smashed hard drives of Debbie Wasserman Schultz found in the garage of Imran Awan's previous residence? What about the 33,000 deleted emails, the destruction of evidence of Hillary Rodham Clinton? What about the tarmac meeting by Loretta Lynch, 40 minutes? What about all of those issues of real criminality? And yet you have a pre-dawn raid against Paul Manafort. To me, this is absolutely disgusting. And I'm going to tell you right now, we are so close to this cold civil war going hot. If you can't feel it, you're not paying attention. All of this, we're going to be talking with our first hour guest, Lexi Bess. And Lexi Bess, folks, you might remember her from earlier. It was last month when she was on. I have dubbed her the warrior queen of the conservative millennials. The warrior queen of the conservative millennials. And I'm being very serious about this. She's a crack investigative researcher and a crack investigative journalist. She has done so much investigating and reporting on issues of the day. You can follow her Twitter feed. But again, Lexi Bess, the warrior queen of the conservative millennials. I'm not taking that title back. She's stuck with it. It's a meme that she's stuck with. Sorry about that. Okay. Hopefully she won't mind, right? But I'm going to bring on Joe. Joe, you can bring her in.
Yeah, it's great to be here. As some people notice, we have the video up and running today. Everybody's in studio. And we are going to bring on Lexi Bess from LexiBess.com. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed last time. So whenever I got a phone call asking me to come back for a whole hour this time, yes. I was absolutely beside myself. I was so excited. So thank you very much for having me.
You know what was great is we received, after your appearance, I'm going to say, it was over 100 emails from people saying, have her on, and this time, give her some time, so it's great. Now, a little bit about yourself, Lexi, if you don't mind, just to reacquaint yourself with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. So I am a college student. I am a rising junior at a Southern SEC school. And I have a background in the military. I was in the Air Force ROTC program where unfortunately I was medically disqualified for a fish allergy. Yes, it's one of my favorite stories to tell. I was medically disqualified. And after that, I realized that I still wanted to serve the public in some way. So why not look into investigative journalism? So that's how I've landed here. My goal as a young female conservative is to spread the message that is not being spread. what we hear and what we see on Twitter or around social media, we see a lot of people are spreading the leftist view, I made a video about this on my Facebook page. And the title of the Facebook video was "Don't Be the Liberal Vegan." And what I mean by that is don't feel like you have to fit this mold. Really, mostly on college campuses, we have students coming in from a very Southern conservative background, and they're almost brainwashed by those that they're around on college campuses. And they feel like they have to fit this stereotypical mold of being a liberal vegan. Everyone wants to be a liberal vegan. So the fact that I step on college campuses and I am the total opposite of the mainstream, of the main flow on college campuses, people are starting to realize that it's acceptable to be yourself and it's acceptable to stand for your values. And so that's kind of, I guess, where the warrior queen comes in, is that my goal is to be this voice for those who are either too scared or feel like they don't have the platform to voice their conservative views or their conservative opinions, especially as a millennial.
And it's so important today, and I believe you're what you're standing for is right and proper, and I'm so proud. I mean, so it's like my daughter, you know. I'm just so proud of the fact that you are able to, and are really presenting the conservative values to a generation that, and I don't want to paint the millennials with a broad brush, but many within, or at least the perception is many within the millennial generation are morally, spiritually, and intellectually bankrupt. And I think that's not true, and you're obviously, you know, proof of that, and your tenacity for the truth is fantastic. And I would urge everyone to follow Lexi Bess on Twitter. You're known as Bessie, right? Or at Lexi Bess, but Bessie on Twitter. And,
yes, I am at Lexi Bess. Yes.
All right, and then Facebook is the same, I believe, correct?
Yes, the Facebook is official Lexi Bess.
Okay, all right, good, all right, fantastic. Well, you know,
let's start here.
Yeah,
since
go
we're
ahead.
Talking about the media, Lexi, I'm not sure how much you've seen of the new YouTube policy where they've been teaming up with the ADL and other organizations to continue to censor conservative content, stuff that they view as what they call conspiratorial or extremist or against what the mainstream puts out as the accepted truth. What are your thoughts on some of the new guidelines on YouTube?
Well, so unfortunately, I kind of saw this coming. I saw it from Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg. So we saw Facebook kind of shutting down these Facebook groups that were conservative Facebook groups. The big Facebook group, it was Pray for President Trump, and it had a huge following. And that Facebook page was shut down. And the founder of that Facebook page made a video and shared it explaining that pretty much he was shut down for his conservative viewpoints and that it would incite violence and all this stuff, even though I want to take you back to the attack that we had in Virginia when the shooting against Republican congressmen happened, and the person who conducted that shooting was a member of a Facebook page that encouraged what he had done and applauded him for what he had done. But that wasn't shut down before it happened. So I'm just going to put that to preface what is happening with YouTube. What we're seeing with YouTube is similar, but also YouTube is a part of Google. So Google bought YouTube I don't know the exact year. So we see what happened with YouTube, and we see this policy where anything that they believe would incite violence, they're going to shut it down. So of course that would mean someone would voice their opinions that would happen to make someone upset, because facts really don't care about your feelings, unfortunately. So we see these YouTube videos being shut down for their conservative beliefs. And then you have this manifesto, this memo put out by a Google employee saying that biologically female are not up to par with the technical standards that are required. It was his thought whether it was correct or not. It at that time, that wasn't the main focus. He was claiming that he was bringing to light the diversity in the workplace of Google, and his diverse opinion is what got him fired. So
ironic, isn't that? Isn't that
isn't
just?
And there's a story.
It's like having a coexist sticker on your bumper and then being a member of Antifa. It's just hilarious.
And there was a story today about Google and gender pay gaps where somebody, I don't know if it was from Google, but put out an ad asking if women feel that they are treated differently than men. And within the first day, they received over 70 calls. I'll have to find the article. I just read it right before the show. But it goes to, just show that Google is not the diverse, all-inclusive, gender equal company that it presents itself to be, and is in fact just like every other corporation out there in it for the money. And I watched an interview of Eric Schmidt from, it had to be 10, 20 years ago. And it was really interesting. I'd never seen this interview referred to before. I've never seen it before. But he was being asked about the bugs in his software from the search engines, how you get so many different results when you search something. And again, this was at least 10 years ago. And he said, well, I see all these different results when somebody searches one thing as bugs in our system. We need to get to the point where when you search for something, you only get the truth and just that one truth and nothing else. Which leads me to believe that, as we know, that they have been moving in this direction for a long time. But how long do you think before we will need to find a new internet, or places like Google and YouTube will censor us out of existence?
Well, it's a very scary slope, and it's hard to guesstimate. It's hard to guess, and it's hard to speculate what that time frame looks like. I think that what it's going to take people like Jack Posobiec, who is doing this march on Google, and it's going to take the public to step up. Your average citizen, the public is going to have to hold these organizations accountable, and that's what it's going to. Now, whether that fixes it or not, I'm not qualified to say, but I think right now it doesn't seem ideal for there to be a third-party search engine when Google is so ingrained in so much of our social media. So it's going to take the fourth estate. It's going to take it. Unfortunately, it's sad that the press, that journalists aren't holding Google accountable and they aren't calling them out, but instead you see these left-wing journalists, these leftist journalists and organizations applauding what Google has done. So it's a very scary future when you are a conservative and you realize that that whenever you search something, the search results are being moved around to what Google deems as true. So it doesn't seem like it could actually happen to where we could get a third-party search engine that would do as great as a job as Google is, when Google is so ingrained in so much of our social media and really just so much of our daily lives.
Okay. And I know, guessing is hard. I guess the real question is, what kind of pushback would we see? Say tomorrow, everything was censored except for the left-wing mainstream media accepted talking points. I wonder what would happen if people would go out in the streets and, would, like we see Mark Zuckerberg trying to launch an alternative to YouTube. And I read about this morning. I can't remember the name, video something, but with these tech titans all having the same ideological mindset, it's hard for me to fathom that it will be any different than YouTube will be. And just like you said, Google is ingrained in so much of the internet, and that's done by design, that I believe, unless people are actually actively seeking for information, they will just use whatever information pops up on Google, and people, take it as gospel. They don't do the fact checking. They don't look for the truth themselves. They just continue. It's like cherry picking information you want to hear. And we see it on both sides of the political spectrum to some degree. While we're talking about the media, my dad opened with the Paul Manafort raid, the pre-dawn raid, and the Mueller special prosecution, all this criminal activity they're intending to push towards Trump. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton gets to destroy evidence. no subpoenas were issued, no pre-dawn raids on her or her, foundation crimes or her Clinton email crimes. What are your thoughts on this double standard of law?
Oh my goodness. So it's hilarious. It's so insane that you almost have to laugh at it to make yourself feel better. So what we're seeing, I mean, y'all have probably spoken about it quite a few times, and I'm sure many people know this, but you have 8 of the 16 appointed members of Mueller's team have made political contributions to Democrats, while the other 8 have no history whatsoever of this, whether it be conservative or liberal. You don't see it from the other 8 members. So the only political party the only bias that is on Mueller's team is liberal or Democrats. So that's a big red flag. And then you sit here and you're wondering, why is it that all this is, if we're gonna demand that the public know what actually happened with Russia, and the public deserves to know the truth, then why doesn't the public deserve to know the truth of the Democrats? Why doesn't the public deserve to know the truth over Hillary Clinton deleting her emails, or Loretta Lynch and all the things that are being said of Loretta? Why are there no investigations? Why are there no special counsel? Why are there no special counsels looking at those? Is what a lot of people are saying. Unfortunately, it's only coming from one side. Unfortunately, it's only coming from conservatives for the most part. But the hypocrisy is astounding. And this hypocrisy is what we've been seeing from the left for what I think has been years. So, what was brought up in the beginning, those opening remarks, as far as the Mueller investigation goes, it's a really big concern. And it makes you wonder why our Department of Justice is not being directive. Why is it being objective and allowing political bias to infiltrate what it's set in place to do? It's set in place to hold everyone accountable, whether that means that they need to hold President Trump accountable, but they also need to hold the Clintons accountable. And they're not. They're picking and choosing who they're investigating. But there seems to be this argument that, well, it doesn't really matter that 8 of the 16 appointed members of Mueller's team contributed to Democrats, because you have to go through all these steps and you have to go through to make sure that the investigation runs smoothly. That's the argument that that the Washington Post made a video the other day about how it explained why the political bias doesn't matter. And the public is reading that, they're watching that, and they're believing that. And it amazes me that we're just totally dismissing the bias there. We're totally dismissing how the DOJ leans more towards the left. And it's very sad. And it makes you question the integrity of our entire government. It makes you question the integrity of the FBI, it makes you question the integrity of the DOJ. And it's just a very scary time on who can you actually trust.
Exactly. And Lexi, you've got fresh eyes, okay, looking at this with fresh eyes. I'm looking at this, what's taking place based on my observations during the Nixon impeachment, or the run-up to what would have been his impeachment, but he resigned before that, back on August 8th, 1974, which, by the way, we just saw just 2 days ago. It was the commemorative date of that. But you'd mentioned something as we near the bottom of the hour break here, about a minute away from it. You had mentioned Robert Mueller, 16 investigators. James Quarles, $30,000 he gave to the Hillary or DNC. $30,050, by the way. Jeannie Reed, $9,150. Andrew Weissman, $4,300. And then you've got Elizabeth Prelogar. You've got Brandon Von Grack, Greg Andrews, Andrew Goldstein, and Rush Atkinson, all giving money. Those are 8 now, 8 of the 16, as you correctly mentioned, and not one of the other 8 have any political affiliation. So the deck is stacked against Donald Trump in this investigation. Quite frankly, I want your take on the other side of this on the break, if possible. I like to know what members or what people in your university, I'm talking about the professors, I'm talking about the students, what they're saying about this investigation, and in particular the impanelment of a grand jury, and whether they think, Donald Trump is going down. Is there a celebratory mood? And that's kind of, again, on the other side, I would like to really get your take on this. But when we look at this, you're absolutely correct. And by the way, Congressman Trent Franks, a Republican from Arizona, House Judiciary Committee, is finally getting on board, or just got on board recently, saying that Mueller needs to go. But I just wanted to make sure that people were aware of that. But the trail of criminality that we saw under Obama is not being at all. There's no.
It's like Trump's being prosecuted or investigated and harassed for crimes that have not been found, that he has not committed, while the Obama regime, including Hillary Clinton, Loretta Lynch, Samantha Powers, Susan Rice, all seem to get immunity from their obvious scandals and law-breaking activities, criminal activities that have even come out in the open, to where the investigations, reach their full potential in the public's eye with the facts coming out, but not being taken by any legal or federal agency with legal powers in the government, probably because of their loyalty to the Obama administration and his ideology, versus Trump and, trying to put Americans first and making America great again. Can't have that in this day and age. Folks, our guest is Lexi Bess. LexiBess.com is the website. We'll be right back after this network break. Don't go anywhere.
Reporting on what the mainstream media won't, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Exposing the New World Order, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stand by. Doug and Joe will be back shortly. Putting truth into action, you're listening to the
Lexi Best, LexiBest.com is our special guest on the Hagmann Report. Of course, it is Thursday, August 10th, 2017. We have her for one more segment. She is what I have been calling the warrior queen of the conservative millennials, because that's exactly what she is. She fights for what she believes in. Poli-sci and poli-sci international relations major, and very well studied. LexiBest.com. Follow her on Twitter as well as Facebook. Do so. Up and coming rising star. She's got, I'm telling you, up and coming rising star in the media and poli-sci world. But to continue my question, and to wrap my question up, was before the break I was asking about what was I asking about? What was my question? Because that was like a compound question I was getting to. Do you remember, Lexi?
We were talking about the double standards of justice. And
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you know, forget about that, because during the break, and folks, you have to understand, during the break we were having a conversation. Let's ask this question: what are you seeing on campus? On the campus, are you seeing heavily anti-Trump, some level of sanity of you know, what are you seeing among the professors and among the student body?
Well, what classes have not started back yet for the fall. I've just gotten up here early to get settled in. But what I saw a lot last semester, right after the election, right after the inauguration, all these students were losing their minds. Like they had never lost before. They had never lost. They grew up seeing President Obama win 2 elections. They grew up with Twitter. My generation, literally, you have to think about that. My generation grew up with Twitter and with Tumblr and with these social media outlets that push the left idea and push the left's agenda. So a lot of my generation has grown up with that. Therefore, after the election, after the inauguration, I had one class. I remember this. I totally forgot to mention this during the break. I had one class. It was the day after the election, and it was an African studies class. And this professor was so upset that Trump had won. She made us sit. We sat in a circle around the room. It was like a seminar, like a discussion. And we went around to talk about our feelings on the election and how we felt. And she was like, I feel like after making such strides with President Obama, here we are now. And I'm just so devastated. I cried last night and all this stuff. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking around, and I pick out 5 other students that you can just tell that they voted for President Trump. We were on the same team, but it was 5 against a class of 40. So we're sitting in this circle, and people are going around and they're saying, well, I think that I have friends whose parents happen to be illegal immigrants, and I'm just so sad for their future. And in my mind, I'm like, well, girls, they shouldn't be illegal immigrants in the first place, so they should be scared no matter who's president. And then someone else over here was talking about, he's a misogynist and a racist and blah blah blah. And 30 minutes I dealt with this. 30 minutes. None of the Trump supporters said anything. And finally, I raised my hand and I said, hello, my name is Lexi King. I'm not a misogynist. I'm not a racist. And I voted for Trump. And that's all I have to say. And she looked at me.
Oh, wow.
And she looked at me and she was like, and the whole class was just shook. Like I had just killed their firstborn child, was how they looked at me. And so the teacher was just like, well, do you care to elaborate? And I was like, sure. So it really was picking a lesser of 2 evils. It was either picking a woman who was responsible for the deaths of, many things, and a woman who deleted emails, and a woman who was just of questionable character and integrity through and through, or someone who had said some comments he probably shouldn't have said, but is actually concerned about the economy and concerned about me having a job after I graduate. So the decision wasn't really difficult. Someone who was a murderer or someone who said some questionable things, but had my job interests in mind.
There you go.
And
what in the response? It couldn't have been pretty.
I was marked.
Oh yeah.
I was marked. I only had a few weeks left in that class anyway, and I was so sick of hearing about how it was a very heavy minorities have it rough, which, you know, so that's an art. It was a very just anti-conservative. It was a very left class that I had been dealing with all semester. And I was done. I had had enough. So after I said that, these students were like, anytime that they spoke, their tone changed because they realized that someone was in the room that they were generalizing, even though they themselves don't want to be generalized, and they speak about that all the time. But these other students kind of changed their tone, like, I just don't understand how you can support someone who's just going to take steps back. Like all the other students, they had something to say about what I had said. Like they wanted to like go against it. And I just let them. I was like, I've said my piece.
Right.
You all have marked me. I don't care. Oh, and I mentioned the march because there were a bunch of people sitting, so I couldn't get to class. I talked about this last segment. All these students were sitting and I had to get an officer to escort me to class because I didn't feel safe and I couldn't get through the crowd.
Yeah.
And I paid $20,000 to go to that class. So this officer escorted me to class. And I was like, and also that what y'all are doing out here is not gaining anyone's respect. Y'all are literally throwing a temper tantrum. I understand it's your right to assembly, but he's the president. Newsflash. We had the Great Compromise. We had the Electoral College. He's the president.
Not my president.
Like
electoral. Did they say what's that? Electoral College. What's that? I'm sorry.
The popular vote should have won. The popular vote should have won. And then I looked at them and I was like, you realize that if you took away California and New York, the popular vote Trump would have won. Do you realize that?
And there's still some debate as to whether he did win the popular vote with the amount of voter fraud that they have found. And I know people will dispute the numbers that have come out, but didn't you cite that a statistic about each state had a certain percentage?
A recent survey, you're looking at 130% more registered voters than there are people alive, which, interestingly enough, 7 different states that came through in this one survey. But getting back to what you said, I can almost envision you at your sorority house, your dorm room, pulling your covers back and seeing like a severed paper mache Donald Trump head. I guess you got to be old enough for the Godfather to really get that reference. But nonetheless, okay, wow. But so, okay. But I guess we're not surprised. But this is real. And you ran the gauntlet. You had to run the gauntlet, be escorted to your vehicle because you did not feel safe given the environment from the Hillary supporters.
Well, it wasn't even to my car. I just wanted to go to class.
Or class,
I just wanted to go to the thing. No, it's okay. I just wanted to go to the thing that I paid $20,000 to go to. I tapped this officer on the shoulder and I was like, sir, they aren't moving. Well, I can't make them move, ma'am. I was like, oh no, you can escort me through the crowd to get to class. And that's what he did.
That's and to think about that, that's just really crazy. All right, so where do you see? Okay, what's the temperature today? Because I want to get into, especially given your majors of poli-sci and international relations and such. I'd like to get into like the Middle East landscape, kind of tap your brain a little bit about that. But what do you see today, or what's the temperature today in the campuses? Is it Donald Trump's going down? Is that what, or is it kind of like?
Has it died out? The hysteria died out?
Yeah.
It's definitely died down. I think a lot of students right now are very concerned about the whole North Korea situation. I had a lot of people that I go to school with, it kind of exploded on social media when Trump made the remarks, North Korea tests us, we're going to fight back. And a lot of fellow students freaked out. They were like, oh my gosh, this means that we are going to war with North Korea. It's inevitable. We're all going to die. It's like the Cold War. Like, I'm talking crazy things. So I think that the focus is still on Trump, but the focus has shifted more towards threats, towards national security threats. So now there's this shift from the U.S. is crumbling because we have President Trump in power. It's shifting to, oh my gosh, North Korea. Like that's a thing. we need to be concerned.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we are now. People realize that this is an actual threat, and they realize that they're not going to die tomorrow by the hand of President Trump. Like, that's less likely than an actual attack from North Korea. So there's definitely been a shift.
Okay. And that's interesting, I suppose, given Donald Trump's Twitter history of late on balance, but then you toss in the remarks about what was it, Fire and Fury by Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
The question I wanted to get in really before moving on is, because of your demographic and your use of social networking, what are your comments about Donald Trump, about his use of, like, Twitter, for example? What do you think of it? And do you think it's being received in the manner that it should be, because he's bypassing the media tremendously. So what do you think about the Twitter usage of Donald Trump, given your experience and your demographic?
Well, I do think that when used correctly, it's a great way to get a message straight to the people that you want the people to know from your administration. There's no filter through the media, which is nice. So when used correctly, it can really help the public. I mean, you had radio and television through these different elections, and it was a way for the president to get a message straight to the people. And now you have social media. So it's just an evolution of getting a message to the people. However, the president does need to think or have a filter at times, just at times. Like, like whenever he made the announcement with the transgenders in the military, he can do that. Like, that is an announcement from his administration that he wants to get to the people. Go for it. But when you have him make this slide remark about, I think, oh my gosh, I can't remember the exact representative, but I think Representative so-and-so should take a vacation to Vietnam since he's never actually been there, but claims he has. That tweet, I quote retweeted it, and I had a little reaction to it, because I was just like, I was so shocked that the president of the United States had just said that. It was so sassy. That's who he is. So I'm happy to know that that's his character. But I do think it's good to get a message to the people of an announcement when you want to get it to them. But I think that the slide unprofessional remarks shouldn't be posted. I do think that you, as someone who represents the United States, you owe it to the people you represent to present yourself with some form of professionalism, because you literally are
right,
the representative for the American people. And I view it as the same, since he is the commander-in-chief, I view it as the same as a military person. A military person always, well, from my time with Air Force ROTC, you are always professional. You don't hug. You literally do not hug other people in your uniform. You have your emails addressed a certain way. You have a certain presence on social media. You do not question the president. You do not question the commander-in-chief publicly. You just have these set standards of professionalism because you represent the United States of America. So I think that our president also needs to have those set of standards where he literally represents the American people, and he needs to be professional about it.
I agree. Now, since you brought the military in your relationship and your time there, I got to ask you, how many transgendered people did you know in the military? Personally, no. I come across were in your unit.
None.
There we go.
We're in my unit.
There we go.
A lot of training, a lot of time was wasted to teach me how to handle transgenders. in the military. That's the part I had a problem with. And I also had a problem with the fact that I was told because of a fish allergy, I took medical attention away from those who needed it. Meanwhile, there's someone who is seriously taking medical attention away from other people through his or her decision to transition. The amount of money spent teaching military personnel how to approach transgender personnel, and also the medical expenses and all this other stuff that was being covered, it really didn't make sense that all you have to do is stab me with an EpiPen. I don't take that much medical attention away from someone who needs it. This other person does. So when the president made that announcement, it completely made sense to me because I was like, y'all, I fish out. Like, yeah, really? Fish. That seriously takes medical. And I understand that it's a small portion of people in the military that deal with that, but you have to think, I mean, if you have to take certain medications, or if you have diabetes, or if you're allergic to certain foods, you can't join the military. It's a very selective process. 1% of the United States serves 1%. So not just anyone, not just anyone can serve. It's 1%. So it would make sense that they would have these medical guidelines that's like, hey, if you have these hormonal issues, like you're going to take a lot of medical attention away from those who need it. Like, I'm sorry, but no, like unfortunately, we have to disqualify you. I mean, same as said to people who.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but it only makes sense because, people with a heart murmur or allergy or some other even learning disabilities are not allowed to enter the military. So why, with somebody who's choosing to basically mutilate themselves, and as you said, would require all this extra medical attention, and they went through the figures and released how much extra medical costs it would be per trans soldier. It's ridiculous that these people should be exempt from an organization that's there to defend this country, and such an elite group of people. As you said, 1% of the population is basically, I don't know, that's what's
1%
taken.
in the military.
1% of the military.
1% of the population
1% serves in the military.
Right, yeah.
And it needs to be selective, and they need to have guidelines, and they need to have these regulations where certain people just aren't allowed to serve for the best interest not only of the country but of the other soldiers around them. And I think you're right on the money.
And what you said though, and Lexi, you actually had to attend sessions where they had to tell you how to interact with these people,
with fellow soldiers.
Yes. Well, I was told about this training. Okay. I was medically disqualified before I ever had the privilege of participating in this training. However, the person, soon to be fiance, this guy that I am with, he is still in the Army, in the National Guard. And I asked him, I was like, hey, in your basic, did you have to go through this training that tells you how to approach someone who's transgender? He was like, oh, yes, we wasted so much time going over step by step how to approach someone who was a transgender, where we could have been spending that time focusing on other tactics that could have actually saved our lives. So that was kind of hit me right across the face, was the amount of, I think it is important to understand how to approach a transgender person, but I call it wasted time because that transgender person shouldn't even be there in the first place. If you're not going to take time to teach the men and women of our armed services how to give me an EpiPen because I'm allowed to serve because of my fish allergy, like if you're not going to take time to teach people how to use an EpiPen to save my life, why are you teaching them how to approach a transgender person who takes even more medical attention away from men and women in uniform?
Amen.
So that was how I viewed it. It just doesn't make any sense why, and that's where most of the money came from. Most of the money, it wasn't that this money was being spent on the operation. Some of it might have been, but from my understanding, not all this money was spent on the operation. A lot of the money was spent on the therapy and the medicine for post-surgery or leading up to the surgery. but a lot of it was spent on training. So it baffled me that we were spending all this money. Meanwhile, we have men and women coming home with severe cases of PTSD going untreated, as well as veterans who are homeless on the streets. But no, we're going to spend money to help this person with their decision that they made. So.
It's hard to believe. I need to ask you. In fact, I got a couple of emails from people wanting me to ask you, because of your activities on social networking, specifically Twitter, Facebook. What's trending right now? What's hot on Twitter? Whether it's politics, geopolitics, or is it something totally outrageously irrelevant to anything?
Right this second? Well,
you know, I mean,
it's a combination. It is a combination of a lot of it's politics. The more I mostly get my news from Twitter, and whenever I say news, I don't mean like people tweeting. I mean these news organizations and their journalists are tweeting, and I consider that news because it is. It's coming from a journalist or a news organization, and they're treating it as news. So I should. So you're seeing a combination of news and some celebrity gossip, but mostly news. What really bothered me, what was trending the other day, was Obama Day. That had me in a tizzy.
Yeah, I saw that.
Why do we have Obama Day when there's President's Day?
Right.
I'm confused. Not that I'm saying he did like a few things that were like decent that might be worthy of like appreciating, but why are you saying that you're not good enough to be in line with other people who are celebrated on President's Day, like Abraham Lincoln or George Washington? So you have to have your own separate holiday in Illinois. You have to have your own day to celebrate your birthday. Really?
Yeah, exactly. Now, of course, the excuse was, well, it's really not an official holiday. No one got work off. The state and federal offices were still open, but nonetheless, the icon or the ideal, making him an idol like that is just incredible. I thought, and the hubris behind it as well.
Well, that's a major problem. Is idol. People are literally idolizing him. People are idolizing him. And I guess you could just go ahead and say that would probably be one of the biggest problems in our society is we are idolizing material things such as a president. Right. No material thing should be idolized. I'm a Christian, so I definitely don't have idols. Material possessions are not important to me. I am here to get back up there. So I'm not going to idolize anybody. But what's wrong, in my opinion, with our generation, with what we're seeing today, are people are putting the President Obama up on this platform up. They're idolizing him. And that, I think you could probably pinpoint all the problems to that concept right there.
I gotcha. What about the infiltration of groups like Antifa, Indivisible, other groups in where you're at, where you're attending at university? Do you see a large presence or a presence at all of groups like Antifa, groups like Indivisible, groups like Black Lives Matter, and other such groups? What's the level of presence?
Well, Antifa, thankfully, does not have a presence at my university. But that could change. That could change this semester. However, Black Lives Matter does have a presence, but the most presence I've seen are like candlelight ceremonies honoring those who have died because of police brutality, who happen to be minorities. I've seen candlelights for those, but I haven't seen a very strong, other than the Not My President. When Not My President happened, people came out of the woodwork. I was shook. Felt very overwhelmed, and I didn't know that many people were on my campus. It made me very aware of my surroundings, but it's not as strong as I would say other universities, thankfully.
Lexi Bess is our guest, lexibess.com. Lexi, I want to thank you so much for joining us. We only have a minute left. Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with?
Absolutely. So really my biggest thing that I'm trying to push right now is to not lose hope would be a big thing, and to hold others accountable and to point out the facts and to explain that facts truly don't care about your feelings. A study recently came out that whenever you allow your child to go through a transition and whenever you allow them to change their gender as a child, it is considered child abuse. When you allow your child to go through a transition, you are literally sterilizing that child when they complete their transition. That is child abuse. Facts don't care about the left's feelings, and you really need to hold them accountable to it.
Absolutely right.
Fantastic. Lexi Bess, the warrior queen of the conservative millennials. That's my title for, I don't know whether she likes it. I don't know. Hopefully she doesn't mind that. But Lexi, thanks so much for being part of our program and sharing what you're seeing in your demographic in your venue with us. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate what you do. And thanks for being such a great presence on social networking as well.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It is always a pleasure.
All right. Lexi Bess, we're going to have you back often. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Joe, coming up next is going to be Steve Quayle, Tim Alberino.
Steve Quayle and Derek Gilbert.
Or I'm sorry. I spoke with Tim Alberino. Yeah.
Reporting on what the mainstream media won't, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Exposing the New World Order, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stand by. Doug and Joe will be back shortly.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the Hagmann Report. We have a fantastic few hours coming up with Derek Gilbert and Steve Quayle. We're going to be getting into a number of very interesting and important topics. Both of these gentlemen were guests on together just a few months ago. They came on. And now they're coming back again to talk about a number of things. We have Derek Gilbert with us. We're going to bring him on right now. Derek, welcome back to the Hagmann Report.
It's my honor to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's great to have you. And I know we have Todd bringing on Steve, I believe. So he's good. Steve, are you with us?
I am with you.
Well,
Awesome.
It's great to have you both. Steve Quayle, SteveQuayle.com, Derek Gilbert, Skywatch.
Thank you.
Skywatch TV. And I got to tell you, both of these gentlemen, absolutely fantastic and famous in their own right. And I use the word famous. Maybe that's not the right word, but really fantastic independent researchers. And I have a lot of respect for both Derek Gilbert and Mrs. Gilbert, as well as Steve Quayle, and of course his wife. Both of you, thanks for joining us. Steve, we're gonna kick it over to you. Why don't you start us off here, if you don't mind?
Well, I'll start the ball rolling. First of all, we want to thank those of you who will be coming to Branson, and unfortunately, but also unfortunately, it's sold out. We do have a waiting list. We're limited by the powers that be and the owners of the mansion that we cannot go beyond what they have seats for and what the fire marshal will let them. But we are offering live streaming, Doug, and I think this will be one of the most unusual conferences in conference history. Not because of who's there, but because of the timing of the events unfolding. You know, we're seeing so many ancient themes coming back into the contemporary headlines. If you look at Drudge, I think they had 5 or 6 of them, new dinosaurs, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's everything that we've talked about. And so what's interesting is that, when people all over the world, they obviously can't come to Branson. There's no seats available, but they can learn, I think. And so what our goal is at Branson is to give them an understanding of history from start to finish. And it's like Derek's book, The Great Inception. It's Satan's psyops from Eden to Armageddon. And most people don't understand the connection. The idea is simply this, that truly there's nothing new under the sun. And when it was so effective the first time for Satan to promise Adam and Eve that if they just would eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they would become like God. Right now, everybody in the billionaire world and in the prolonging life forever mode is basically talking about there's nothing that will be kept from them. So we have what I call technological Babylon. That's one of my words I coined a number of years ago. That's taking place. And just as God came down to scramble the languages, there's going to be an event. I don't know what, but I think that we can take our cue from the past. There will be an event. It's going to scramble everything up. It's interesting because, as you know, Derek, they were talking about AI developing a language that they could not interpret, so the machines started talking to themselves. And it's my contention that as AIs and robotics and sex bots and everything else become more and more, how should I say this, human-like by the efforts to replace humans, that we're in the period of the Terminators. We are in the period of, beyond Arnold Schwarzenegger coming from the future to do whatever he's going to do. And so I want to turn that over to you, Derek, because, again, from Eden to Armageddon, I asked Derek, too, before we went on the show tonight, earlier this morning, I said, Derek, I want you to share just, go where you want to go. Now, Derek's going to be, officially presenting a lot of stuff at Inception, from his book, The Great Inception, at Branson. And so, you can come and hear him, or you can order the online streaming, which will absolutely, I promise you, be mind-changing. It'll be revolutionary, and your lives, because of, I believe, the anointing that's going to be there, you'll be hearing Henry Groover and also David Langford from 9 to 12 on Sunday morning, which we're going to live stream, Doug. I think it's going to be a powerful, powerful thing. And I think God is literally, I'm going to call this a Queen Esther moment for such a time like this, because as the days grow darker, people need to understand the power that's available to them for the living God that the pulpits, and you and I call them the pulpiteers, have robbed from the people. So, Derek, aren't you surprised, and probably not surprised, but aren't you, I don't know what word to use, amazed maybe, at how many headlines now are breaking forth about the ancient this, ancient that? Go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really drove my research for the book. I've always had an interest in archaeology, paleontology. You know, as a kid, I was fascinated with dinosaurs and ancient man and so forth. And it wasn't until my 30s, and Sharon can testify to this, we had a very interesting and heated discussion after we got married. The Holy Spirit's been working on me for a long time. After we got married, I was still convinced that you could syncretize Darwinian evolution with the Bible. And of course, that doesn't make any sense, because if there's no sin from which to fall, if death has always been with us, then, what do we need to be redeemed from? You've got to have the foundation for the house before you can build the house on it. And if there's no original creation from which we fell, then Jesus' death on the cross is nothing more than a sad chapter in human history, instead of the pivot on which all of history hinges. So the book, The Great Inception, really dives into secular archaeology, paleontology, for the evidence to show that the Bible is an accurate record of this long war that's been taking place since creation between the old gods, who are real, and the Creator, who created them. So these small g gods, if you're more comfortable thinking of them as fallen angels, that's fine, but just be advised that in the Bible, God calls them gods. So I'm on safe theological ground there. The apostles and prophets knew that these things were real. These are the gods of the pagan nations around ancient Israel. There are episodes that take place in the Bible that really make a lot more sense when you understand what was going on in the struggle in the supernatural realm. What was going on with between Yahweh and his chosen people and these rebellious gods who were trying to destroy God's chosen people. His allotted heritage is what the Bible calls them. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that there's more stuff there, which is fantastic, because it makes for, because I love to talk in front of people, so it gives me a lot of stuff to say. So, but more than that, it makes the Bible come alive when you understand that the Red Sea crossing was not God just trying to show off, fancy special effects. The confrontation between Elijah and the priests and prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel was not so God could show off with the fire from heaven. Jesus' transfiguration, where he was transformed into a being of light on Mount Hermon, was chosen at a specific point in history and at a very specific geographic location to send a message into the spirit realm to these fallen angels, these small g gods. So all of that is just woven through all of history. But the thing is, these entities are still at work in the world today. And the follow-up book to The Great Inception is going to track a number of these gods who I think are specifically forming up for the final confrontation, the Battle of Armageddon, which I explain why in the Great Inception, why that's going to take place at Jerusalem for Mount Zion, the Temple Mount, rather than at the Valley of Megiddo, as many of us have been taught. I think that what we're seeing in the world today in the form of Islam is the supernatural equivalent of a corporate merger, where a number of entities that have rebelled against God and who are named in the Bible have essentially joined forces. And in so doing, they've created a religion that at its current rate of growth will surpass Christianity as the religion with the most adherents on planet Earth within the next 50 years or so. And I think that there are some very specific things that we can learn from the history of these gods about what is to come. One of the things that I stumbled onto, and this is what I'm just going to tease a little bit of what I'll bring to the conference in Branson, because I don't want to give too much away too soon. I've not really talked about it publicly much, because in the back of my mind, I knew that this conference was coming. But it really startled me in researching the ancient world. And I'm talking the ancient pre-flood world, and specifically in the ancient Near East. When I say ancient Near East, I'm talking about today what we would see on the map as Iraq, Kuwait, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Israel. Okay, that in that place in that part of the world, secular scholars who normally don't want to touch the subject of cranial deformation, and by that I mean those deformed skulls that you've heard about from, well, Steve and Timothy Alberino, Tom Horn, L.A. Marzulli, their recent expedition down to Peru. Apparently, the pre-flood world in the ancient Near East, according to secular scholars, was ground zero for this phenomenon. Because when you go back far enough in history, back to the time before the flood, it appears that this was a universal thing. It wasn't one social group, one like social caste, like the chiefs or the priests who were allowed to have these pointy heads. It was everybody in the ancient world, from Jericho to what today would be around Aleppo, Syria, all the way over to Western Iran, and specifically one specific point in southeastern Iraq that seems to be the starting point for all of this. So it was surprising to me to find out that this was a bigger thing the farther back we go in history than I ever realized. So I'll speculate some as to why I think people were engaging in this behavior before they invented writing. And apparently for a period, according to the secular archaeologist, for a period of about 6,000 years, everybody was binding up little Junior's head to turn it into a cone head. Why were they doing that? What were they trying to emulate? Well, we'll talk about that. We'll speculate on that. It appears that practice went away after the flood, interestingly enough. And then I'll talk about the Watchers and why the Watchers are significant, especially to a certain group of people that the Israelites had to push out of the Holy Land when they crossed the Jordan. There was one particular group of people who, again, basing this on secular research and secular scholars, mainstream peer-reviewed scholars, pulling papers from academic journals, and these are scholars who don't have a biblical axe to grind, which is why they're not seeing the whole picture. It appears that there was a group of people who believed that they were descended from and held rituals to summon the spirits of the Watchers to bless and empower their kings. So I think that has a lot to do with why God, in the book of Joshua in particular, declared certain people in the Holy Land as Karem. I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly, but it's a Hebrew word that means devoted to destruction. God is not a genocidal maniac, as some skeptics would like to believe. There are just some people in this world who are so sold out to the enemy that God said these people and everything that they own are dedicated to destruction, devoted to destruction, destroy everything. Don't even take any spoil. When you destroy this city and burn it to the ground, don't loot it. Just burn everything. It's all contaminated. It's all tainted. This is a word that still is known today in Arabic languages. So this is not a concept that was unique to the God of the Bible, but only the God of the Bible has the right to apply it to anyone. And again, the people group that he applied it to in his orders to Joshua, and even down as far as King Saul, there were certain people who were so sold out to the enemy that God declared them Karem. And again, there is a correlation between the old gods, the Watchers, the angels who kept not their first estate, the angels who are chained in gloomy darkness until the judgment, and these people that the Israelites had to destroy. So that will be the focus of my topic in Branson, and we'll talk a bit about when they're coming back, because those old gods, and there's a lot of occult groups out there that are looking forward to restoring that golden age, and there is a day coming when they will return.
Very interesting.
Well, I want to share this, Doug, in a parallel thought. I think the thing that really is critical is for people to understand, it is my contention, and obviously the parallel thought is that there's nothing new under the sun, but that advanced technology has been known as far into the prehistoric past of the fallen angels, their technology, etc. That's how far advanced the occultists have taken true science, whether it's combining human-animal DNA. I almost called them humanimals, but we're now seeing some things that were even laid out, and it's interesting that Francis Bacon, I know Tim Alvarino has talked on this show about, but I want to go through this because it's critical to what we're going to talk about. Now, at Branson, I'm going to be talking kind of in three different 30-minute segments of the pre-Adamic period, and I call that the Kingdom of Angels, and I also call that the civilization that God judged in Jeremiah chapter 4 on the flood there. There's some people that want to argue, but the two words tohu and bohu, without form and void, are used three times in the scripture, and always judgment. And I think it's important that if people are interested in this, there's probably one of the greatest scholars, he's gone to be with the Lord now, Arthur Custance. You can go to custance.org, TANCE.org. Now, it's fascinating to me because a lot of people don't recognize that America, to many, is considered Atlantis, including Francis Bacon. And Francis Bacon was basically the guy that a lot of people believe was Shakespeare. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But we're talking about the early 17th century. Now, here's what he talked about. Deep underground facilities 3 miles down. I mean, think about this. And we're talking about, 1600s and into the late 1680s. Skyscrapers half a mile high. That's a pretty remarkable statement. Wind and water turbines, artificial atmospheric devices, electrical devices, genetic labs, industrial manufacturing, lasers, powerful telescopes, spectacles for the eyes, magnifying glasses, audio amplification, including headphones, advanced firearms and missiles, flying machines, submarines, and holographic projections. Now, it's important that people understand that there's been a group, and I've been told that the true name for it is the Egyptian priesthood, even though we're going to talk tonight about stuff that goes back into the Sumerian period of time, all of the Sumerian gods. But what's fascinating is simply this. There have been keepers of the ancient secrets and traditions that have been passed on. Remember, knowledge is power. And to these, I will call them this, these assignees of the forbidden knowledge and the forbidden technology, they have always had, if you will, the passing down from their generations to generations. In other words, an all-secrets club of those who are preparing the earth for the return physically of Satan on earth and the time where he will try and rule and reign for 42 months. Now, what's interesting is that there's no way that Francis Bacon could have known this on his own without having a record of it. And if that's true, then you can go to Tenochtitlan in Mexico City, and some of the original designs there are very similar to what obviously Plato wrote about Atlantis. And what is also important is Solon, the Plato's, if you will, mentor, was told by the Egyptian priest of Sais, S-A-I-S, that you Greeks are but children. There have been many cataclysms and will be many more. So it's fascinating that when you take everything into consideration that we're going to be presenting all the different presenters and authors at Branson, the central theme is fascinating because basically it goes back to the times that we know. It's Derek putting pieces of the puzzle together. It's all of the different speakers. Obviously, the extraordinary work of Tom Horn, Dr. Michael Lake, and what's curious is that so much of it takes place in South America. Obviously, L.A. Marzulli was speaking. We've got the foremost speaker in the world coming in on this, and I call him the most interesting man in the world, and his name is Anselm P. Rambla. And so when you start seeing the secrets and the mysteries of the Andes unfolding, And all of these events globally, worldwide, coming to pass, new announcements every day about whether it's a cannibalism in finding bones with teeth marks, and there's all kinds of genetic tests you can do to identify that, the denial of cannibalism, yet the headlines fills the newspapers, magazines, movie theaters, imaginations, and video games. I think it's 14 or 15 video games that now have cannibalism as one of the central themes. For the record, the giants that fled the Holy Land and fled Joshua's command from the Lord, they went all over the world. And it may be interesting, everyone, to know that even John Wesley Powell, who was a curator of the Smithsonian and started covering up stuff, even he was investigating the pyramids along the Mississippi, Ohio River. And then the other thing that's interesting, in Wisconsin. So you can actually go on and do a search for Wisconsin pyramids. And those of you that might be connected or have good night, LexisNexis at your command, there's so much stuff on LexisNexis that about this that has been sanitized from the mainstream internet searches that it is mind-blowing. Literally, you can get lost in this stuff. I'm also going to be talking about something that's fascinating is this. There are multiple external resources and dissertations from different people around the world how literally the Egyptians covered the entire world with their seafaring skills. Now remember, you always think of just Thor Heyerdahl, if anybody's familiar with that, and Kon-Tiki, but it's way beyond that. Some of the Chinese, if you will, 2000 BC ships were 110, just about 410 feet, over 100 meters. And Maui, and this is fascinating, the island that Maui is named for was an Egyptian god. All of the totem poles and all of the different, if you will, idols that all these seafarers carried all go back to Egypt. And then in the book that Tom Horn and I wrote together, Cloud Eaters, and again, the Cloud Eaters book, the Cloud Eaters was simply talking about the giants. As you looked up at them, they were so tall that it looked like their heads were in the clouds. Now, no, I can't say it. I was going to say, if you look at modern society, you'd think their heads are someplace else, but I won't say that, okay? In other words, I can't say that. But the point is that the idea that the Egyptians were in the Grand Canyon, it's a matter of mockery to some, but the point is there's guys who are even the Native Americans that trace their lineage to that. And it's not because somebody came over from Egypt, married a Native American wife and produced that. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about in the ancient times. So the idea is that very, very clearly that the caves throughout the United States, the Americas, all of the underground tunnels, all of the different repositories for information artifacts, those things are a matter of record, there was a time when the gold artifacts from Kincaid's Tunnel were on display in the Smithsonian, Washington, D.C. It's fascinating because one of the artifacts was King Akhenaten and Queen Nefertiti. So the astonishing thing is that there was a global draw to the Americas. Now remember, America was known as Amaruca to the natives, and that's the land of the plumed serpents. So if Atlantis was destroyed, and if the Americas are part of it, or if there are places in America, it still is interesting that to the South American, the Native Americans, they knew this land as the land of the plumed serpent. Then you get into the understanding of who the plumed serpent was. You get into Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, Kukulkan. In essence, it goes to the white giants that came from the east. I think Tim Alberino found probably one of the most remarkable things that's been found in contemporary society as it relates to the Old Testament, where they found literally the, if you will, the how do I put this nicely? The complaining area that was written in not so nice language about Joshua. They were fleeing. The giants were fleeing Joshua, the usurper. And so throughout America, you've got Canaanites. You've got basically a written language called Ogham. You've got the massive investigation and the ensuing understanding by Barry Fell, who wrote Bronze Age America, Saga America, and America BC. Harvard trained. You've got too many things stacking up. You've got too many things lining up. So remember this, if you've controlled the narrative for thousands of years, there's a reason you didn't want the truth out. And that, by the way, that's true so many times in pulpits. I can't tell you, people from all over the world say that when they ask, for instance, Derek, their pastor to look into this, it's almost like they think, they feel like they're vampires because the pastors, some of them just literally freak out and say, we won't go there, we won't go there. It's because the believers, and by the way, God's got nothing to hide of the truth. If, the point being is that all of the believers, if they had understood, if they could have dealt with the root of sin, they wouldn't have reaped the fruit of sin. In other words, it is the beginning of a thing, and that's why Jesus cursed the mustard tree, if you will, and said, not the mustard tree. He cursed, and I apologize, everybody. I've been fighting a headache all day. The tree, what was it, Derek? Was it the olive?
The fig tree.
And said, no man eat fruit from the. I'm sorry,
it was a fig
tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, fig tree. Okay. The idea, thank you so much. And if I'm a little looking for words, I thank those of you who intercede for me on a daily basis. I had to call Romy. I had to call David Langford because that's how bad a headache was. So, again, I'm normally not this struggling for words. So in the bottom line, and I've used that word too many times, the idea is simply this. America's history has been covered up to control it, just as the Middle East, just as the Egyptians. And when you've got an Egyptian, basically the president under the king and under the Egyptian parliament or their equivalent in the late 1880s, writing to the U.S. government, wanting all of their Egyptian artifacts back from all of their expeditions, and then saying if you can't return them, destroy them. Even in that time period and when I say the Egyptian Brotherhood, I mean the Egyptian priesthood, that which most people don't even know exists. And interestingly enough, the best portrayal of that whole Egyptian priesthood was, I think, in either the first or second Sherlock Holmes movie with Robert Downey Jr. When I saw that, I said, here you go, you guys. It's Hollywood, and I think I said that years ago when it came out. So it's very important that people understand the thread of history leads right to the very pages of our newspapers, the movies of our day, the headlines of the internet sites, and now we're in a time where there's nothing that's going to be hidden. How much time do we have, Doug?
We got another 30 minutes before the network break.
Oh, okay. So we're not taking breaks. So, Derek, I'll turn it back over to you because I think it's important that people understand all these things are linked and synced by a central theme, if you will, of snake worship. And I'm not just talking in the desert Southwest. I'm talking worldwide, or dragon worship, or the sea creatures. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. And that's something that I've been digging into. Josh Peck and I are working on a book that'll be out later this year, and this is an aspect of it that kind of surprised me because we were looking into extraterrestrial disclosure, the whole disclosure idea, and to our surprise, we found out that there's a very strong theme there that deals with the long war between Yahweh, the Creator, and chaos. But as you were talking, you mentioned the evidence for the Canaanites fleeing Israel. And I found a paper that I've been looking for a while. This is written in 2002. It was published in the Palestine Exploration Quarterly, which is a publication that's been documenting finds in the Holy Land for, a long time, 150 years. Sharon found something really, really intriguing in the Palestine Exploration Quarterly from like 18 I'm going to forget the year now, but it's like 1869, and I'll talk about that in a minute because it actually relates to Jack the Ripper, which is what she's been writing about in her fictional series. But this scholar named Anthony J. Frendo wrote about these columns that were written about in the 6th century AD by the Greek historian Procopius of Caesarea, who was writing a history of the wars of the Emperor Justinian, and he wrote about the Canaanites who built a fortress in Numidia, which is probably somewhere between Algeria and Tunisia today on the northern coast of Africa. And he said, in that place are 2 columns made of white stone nearby the great spring, having Phoenician letters cut in them, which say in the Phoenician tongue, "We are they who fled from before the face of Joshua the robber, the son of Nun." Now, this was written about 2,000 years after the fact, but apparently at that point in history, the 6th century AD, those columns were still there. They've been lost since then, but it is more evidence of the theory that, the giants who were the target of Joshua's war, and that's documented in Joshua chapter 11, where he concludes the account of his wars against the tribes in the Holy Land, saying there were no Anakim left, except in Gath, which of course is where later, about 500 years later, Goliath of Gath would come forth to do battle with the armies of Israel. But they were the target, and apparently some of them fled and got as far as North Africa and went even further. Now, it's not well known, at least it wasn't known to me, but I don't pretend to be a scholar, until I was digging into the research for my book, that the Canaanites were actually the source of whatever seafaring expertise the Egyptians had. The reason that there were Canaanites, and actually they were Amorites, who were in control of northern Egypt during the period that the Israelites were there during the sojourn, is because apparently the Egyptians had hired the Amorites, the Canaanites, to come to Egypt and basically develop a navy for them. And this relates to the whole Red Sea crossing, because the chief god, the king of the gods of these Amorite sailors, was Baal. Why? Because in their cosmology, Baal defeated the chaos god of the ocean, a god called Yam, and his sidekick, who was called Lotan, which is just the Canaanite form of Leviathan. So Phoenician sailors, the Phoenicians were the descendants of the Amorites, were Baal worshippers for thousands of years. Sailors worshipped Baal because he was their patron god, the one who had defeated the chaos god represented by the sea. That's why when God led the Israelites out of Egypt, he wasn't getting them away from the Egyptian gods. He was getting them away from Baal, the chief god of the people who controlled northern Egypt while the Israelites were there. In fact, even after the Egyptians kicked out these Amorite invaders who took over northern Egypt, for hundreds of years after that, Baal was still the chief god. Ramses the Great was a Baal worshiper. I had no idea until I started digging into the research of my book. Anyway, that's the whole point of the Red Sea crossing. God demonstrating, not only was he basically rescuing Israel, delivering them from the hand of Pharaoh, he was delivering them from the hand of the god of the Pharaoh, Baal, by parting the sea, which was supposed to be Baal's home turf. He's the one who mastered the sea. Okay, watch this. Boom. Waters part. Wall of water on either side. And then when the Baal-worshipping Egyptians follow after them, that's when the waters crash in. It wasn't just special effects. It was a smackdown in the supernatural realm and a message to the chief god of the Canaanites, which is where the Israelites were eventually headed. My people are free now, and by the way, we're coming for you next. So this relates to now what Steve was talking about regarding this idea, this snake worship, this long-running fascination with the serpent realm. And it gets back to what I had talked about previously in the research of the ancient Near East in the time before the flood, and why so many people who lived back in that era were practicing this cranial deformation. What were they trying to emulate? What were they trying to look like? Well, you probably have seen, if you've looked on the internet for any length of time, those little figurines that have been found in Iraq that look like humanoid reptiles or lizard-like humanoids. In fact, doing very mammalian things. Like some of these little figurines feature a female with a pointy head and eyes that look like coffee beans suckling an infant. Now, that's a mammalian thing. Lizards don't do that, okay? Nor do they stand upright normally. But they found 100, 150 of these little figurines all clustered in southeast Iraq, and I'll talk about this in my presentation, why that particular location is important. And it's my belief, you can't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it's my belief that these represent something, some type of entity that was very important to the people in that period of history. Why? Because these little figurines have pointy heads, and of the hundreds of sets of human remains that have been exhumed from the sands of Iraq that date to this period, we're talking 4000 BC and earlier, all of those people have pointy heads. They've all been misshapen, probably through head binding at a very early age. Why? Well, when we look at the entity that's described as a serpent in the garden, we have to understand that it was not a talking snake. The Hebrew word is nakash. Dr. Michael Heiser's done some great work on explaining what exactly that means. And I think there are others who are kind of understanding now where the significance of this, because the word nakash, translated as serpent, also then is used in other books of the Old Testament, specifically Isaiah, where it's used interchangeably with the word seraph, which is the root word seraphim. So you got this entity that is apparently reptilian in appearance or snake-like in appearance. That and the word used to designate it in the book of Genesis is used interchangeably with the same word used for the seraphim elsewhere in the Bible. So what do we have going on here? Apparently, supernatural entities that were familiar to the people of the ancient world, who had a possibly reptilian appearance, and perhaps presented themselves to these people as their gods, which is why they wanted to emulate their gods by shaping their heads in a particular way. Now, again, a lot of this is speculation. And again, the location where these figurines were found and where the head binding or where these sets of human remains with the deformed crania have been found, I think are important. And I'll talk about the significance of that in Branson in a month and a half. But when you go all the way back to the very beginning, I mean, even preceding all of this, preceding even the fall, you go back to Genesis 1, verse 2, and I should look this up so I'm not taking it out of context, because this is kind of important when you're talking about the Word of God, not to add to it or take anything away from it. But you get the sense that there's a long struggle that has been taking place by chaos and the forces of chaos against God, who created order from nothing. And this war extends from the first chapter of the Bible until the very last book of the Bible. Genesis 1, beginning at verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. That's that Hebrew phrase that Steve mentioned earlier, tohu and bohu. And darkness was over the face of the deep. And the word there translated deep is tehom. That is the Hebrew word. It's a cognate, which basically means same word, different language, to an Akkadian word called temtum. And this Akkadian word is also their name for the chaos dragon of the Sumerians, called Tiamat. So plug that into Genesis 1, verse 2. Darkness was over the face of the deep, over the face of chaos, the abyss, Leviathan, Tiamat. You've got an entity that is an enemy of the creator of the universe, showing up even before the serpent in the garden. Genesis 1, verse 2. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Why? To contain something, perhaps? Well, again, that's speculation. The Bible doesn't tell us. But what the scholars call chaos kampf, or struggle against chaos, is a common theme in the ancient Near East. The Mesopotamians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, they all had a similar myth where a warrior god had to do battle with the forces of chaos, usually represented by a dragon or a giant serpent. In the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, it was Tiamat who was defeated by the chief god of the city of Babylon, Marduk. But in the older myths, it was the god Enlil, who was the chief god of the Sumerian pantheon, who waged war against this entity. Interestingly, there's another Sumerian myth and a really interesting cylinder seal image that's been recorded about this myth, where a son of Enlil, who was the god of war, Ninurta, defeated a seven-headed dragon. A seven-headed dragon. If you know Bible prophecy, you understand why that's significant, because there is a seven-headed beast that comes out of the sea, not coincidentally, in the book of Revelation. Because again, the sea, the ocean, represents chaos. And chaos is essentially an entity and an enemy of Yahweh, the Creator. In the Canaanite myth, as I mentioned, it's the god of the sea, Yam, who is accompanied in some of the stories by this chaos dragon called Lotan, which is their version of Leviathan. In Egypt, the myth was a little different. The chaos serpent was called Apophis, or Apep. Apophis was the Greek name for it. Interestingly, that asteroid that's going to make a near pass of the Earth in 2029 was given the name Apophis by the astronomers who found it back in, 2004? Apophis represented the primordial chaos, when there was nothing. And then somehow the sun god Ra emerged and created everything that was. And Apophis was the sworn enemy of Ra, because he wanted to destroy everything and return everything back to the primordial chaos, the way it was before, where there was nothing. And every night, as the solar boat on which Ra, with which Ra crossed the heavens, dropped down below the horizon, this chaos dragon, Apophis, would rise up to try to eat the solar boat. And the god Set, who interesting, was also a god of violence and chaos. The occult world doesn't have to make sense to you. The enemy doesn't care what you believe, as long as it's not the one thing that's true. Set would ride on the front of the solar boat with a spear and defend the solar boat against Apophis. When there was a solar eclipse like the one we'll see here in the United States in a couple of weeks, that was Apophis somehow getting the better of Set and Ra temporarily, and then had to be defeated or pushed back again so that Ra could come back out and everything would be fine again. But this is a myth that's continued down through the ages, through history. Steve talked about the feathered serpent and Quetzalcoatl in the Americas. The Norse had a myth where Thor had to defeat a chaos serpent. And I can never pronounce it correctly. I'm going to mangle it, so I won't even say it. But the Greeks and Romans had a similar myth where Zeus, the Greek storm god, basically Baal with a Greek name, same god, different name, did battle with a chaos monster called Typhon. And this is where things can come into the modern age. And the research that Josh Peck and I have been doing for the forthcoming book found that as Aleister Crowley left the scene around 1947, he died and now knows the truth of the relationship that he should have had with God and Jesus Christ. The organization that he created, the occult organization he created, the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, which was based on his religious magical system, his occult system called Thelema, which he called which had ushered in the age of Horus, the Eon of Horus. He believed that he was channeling information from Egyptian gods. The organization went through a power struggle. One of the guys who emerged as a leader in the new OTO was a fellow called Kenneth Grant. And Grant believed that he was hearing other messages from one Greek god in particular, and that was Set. Now, Set, again, was for the early part of his history, and he's a very ancient god. He was worshipped in Egypt before there was a pharaoh. So we're talking back prior to the Tower of Babel incident. Set was, in later years in Egyptian history, became one of the villains. He was the god of foreigners, the god of the desert, the god of chaos. But between about 700 BC and about 500 BC, the Egyptians were overrun by the Nubians and then the Assyrians and then the Persians. And so the god of foreigners wasn't welcome anymore. And that's when Set became the bad guy who killed his brother Osiris and cut him into 14 pieces and so on. Anyway, Kenneth Grant in the 1950s began hearing from this entity from somewhere in the neighborhood of the star Sirius, he thought. And so he declared that the eon of Horus had already passed and was being replaced by the eon of Set. But Set was also equated by the Greeks with this chaos monster Typhon. So he named his magical system the Typhonian tradition. The point is that it's chaos. Chaos is trying to contact us from the stars, according to this system of magic, and there are a bunch of occultists out there who believe this. And so you've got this strange this recipe of occultism based on channeled messages from entities from the stars, merging with this sort of ancient astronaut meme that's popped up since Eric von Daniken hit the scene in the 70s. And it is nothing more than just another repackaging of this ancient story of God versus chaos. Now, we know how the story is going to end because in Revelation 21, we read that heaven and earth will pass away, replaced by a new heaven and a new earth, and the sea is no more. The sea is no more. Now, if the old heaven and the old earth pass away, I mean, the oceans are part of the earth, correct? So why does the sea get a separate mention? It's because cosmologically, in the Bible, the sea, the abyss, the deep represents chaos, which is represented by these various forms of the chaos dragon, the chaos serpent, the chaos monster. And again, that's what we're seeing in the occult traditions that have come out of Helena Blavatsky and Theosophy through Aleister Crowley and his OTO and Kenneth Grant with his Typhonian OTO. Now here we are in the 21st century. For some unknown reason that I can't fathom, Ancient Aliens is in its 12th season on television, and we just, within the last 2 weeks, the fellow who directs the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, who just coincidentally is named for the chaos monster, the chaos god Seth Shostak, and his group, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is actually the Egyptian word that means man of Set. Okay? Is it just a coincidence? Yeah, okay, maybe, but I'm not much of a coincidence theorist. I think, and this was Kenneth Grant's belief, that there are books, there is information that exists in what they call the Akashic Record. I don't believe the Akashic Record is real. I believe it's lies from demons, doctrines of demons that are whispering in the ears of people who are open to hear what they have to say. Kenneth Grant believed that Aleister Crowley and the horror fiction author H.P. Lovecraft were essentially channeling the same spirit, and that the Necronomicon existed out there in the Akashic Records somewhere, and by using it, they could make contact with this chaos god, Set, the one who was dictating to Grant the Typhonian tradition, this chaos magic with which they want to bring about the next evolution of humanity. That it's all about the return of these old gods, the return of chaos, and the destruction of what God has created to be replaced by nothing, the destruction of reality itself.
That's fascinating.
Well, we're talking about Set, and we're talking about the Temple of Set and everything. I want to read something that's really critical to understanding, because a lot of people, who have been to the Grand Canyon, the real names for all of the, if you will, pyramidal or almost structures that look like the Sphinx were Hopi terms. They were not anglicized or Egyptianized terms that the National Park Service used. Now, I mentioned earlier, this is critical, everyone. When everybody talks about the Great Smithsonian cover-up, I want to give you this. This is an exact quote. Prime Minister Nubar Pasha of Egypt was the first Prime Minister of Egypt and served his first term from January 1884 to June 1888. Prime Minister Pasha of Egypt contacted the U.S. Department of State and requested that all of the Egyptian artifacts found in the Grand Canyon be returned to Egypt. Now, here it is, Derek. Here it is, Doug and Joe. He also requested that no more information about Egyptians ever being in the Grand Canyon be published by the Smithsonian Institution. The Smithsonian archaeologists think that, and they, by the way, there's an unfinished Egyptian pyramid in the Grand Canyon. It looks like the Saqqara pyramid, or as a step pyramid, is a burial tomb because there's an entrance tunnel that is blocked a few feet inside the pyramid. But listen to this. The National Park Service will not allow the archaeologists to excavate any of the pyramids in the Grand Canyon. Now, Derek, I'm sure you get it, I get it. How does this relate to salvation? God is going to lead his people out of the area that's going to be destroyed. I don't know where that is, cities of refuge. But the Pharaoh was a type of the Antichrist that is yet to come. And interestingly enough, the final element when the children of Israel left was, obviously the idea that there is great judgment on Pharaoh, the Red Sea. Now, Derek mentioned a word, catastrophism, and I'm going to be dealing with that at Branson. What if the true biblical narrative, and by the way, the book of Job has a lot to say, as well as other Old Testament books, about God's catastrophic judgment upon a planet called Rahab. And Rahab was between the orbit of Mars and Jupiter. And due to some laws in physics, they can calculate not only the size, but again, the amount, if you will, of gravitational pull that would have been necessary along with the plasma arc. And it goes to basically this. A planet of greater mass and greater electrical charge will destroy the planet of lesser mass and lesser electrical charge. The ancients were terrified of the skies. What I've found through all the years that I've been doing this is all the observatories, every place in the world, all of the astronomers who had the ancient knowledge passed down to them, Tom Horn's trip to Mount Graham, everybody is looking for the skies. They're looking for the, if you will, the testimony of past judgment, but the future judgment coming upon the earth, whether it's Apophis or whether it's other heavenly bodies. Here's the thing, Dirk. We talk about the planets, and everybody will deal or concern themselves with, Planet X, Gabriel's Fist, Lucifer's Hammer, the 10th planet, all these different names, but they avoid probably the greatest fingerprint of a catastrophic judgment on Lucifer. And you go into Ezekiel, the stones of fire, Hebrew idiom for planets, the idea that each star was the abode of an angel, falling stars, or what, shooting stars. The purpose of all this stuff, of ancient history, of putting this into perspective, is to show you the deception that's coming. And by the way, when you go into the Grand Canyon, I just flew over it months ago, and hopefully if I have time, I'll be presenting that at Branson too. But you've got the names of some pretty famous landmarks. And remember, these were told to the first park rangers and the explorers. The Tower of Set, it's Setabrine, and it was named by the Hopi Indians. The Tower of Set was built in the Grand Canyon as a burial tomb for King Setabrine that came to the Grand Canyon, but King Setabrine died on a trip back to Shemau. All the Egyptian hieroglyphs that have eroded off the pyramid. The Set pyramid has rectangular shape, similar to the first pyramids in Egypt. Then you've got the Hopi Indians talking about the most pyramidal structure that actually, I believe, was a sphinx before erosion and intentional destruction took place, is the Tower of Ra. And what's fascinating about the Tower of Ra is that you can actually see an entrance that when you look into the entrance with a high-powered lens, a telephoto, like a Canon 300, 400, extremely high-resolution lens with the sun in the right correct position, it looks like somebody actually, Derek, went in there and blocked it up and painted it white. But you can see footpaths. And what a lot of people don't understand is, like, with aerial imagery and satellite, the ability to take, and I'm not just talking about LIDAR, I'm talking about infrared and ultraviolet. You can actually see old, if you will, paths, footpaths, or horse paths. And this is how so many of the lost cities in Africa and other places have been found. But when you line all these things up, as so many people have done it, Graham Hancock and others, that every single one of the pyramids or the supposed natural structures line up either with Orion's belt or the Pleiades. And it's true not only in Egypt, it's true in the desert Southwest, it's true in Sardinia, it's true all over in Mexico. So by basically doing a regressive stellar projection, you can get the idea when these monuments and Cyclopean architecture, going even back further than 2000 BC, were installed. So even the story that people laugh about, that Mark Antony and Cleopatra, I'll be presenting that in pretty graphic form. I have literally interviewed, Doug, and I've said this before, guys who are on the military mission of the takeout of other giant GIANT mummies from the Grand Canyon. And the thing is, they were there on multiple occasions, and Cliff Mahudi, who we have on the DVD, Holocaust of Giants. And by the way, let me put a pitch in for this. If you want to be brought up to speed and what's going to be happening in the future with the headlines of tomorrow, I would encourage you to get the Unholy Sea, Gen 6 Productions, and you can go to TrueLegendsTheSeries.com, and more importantly, or in conjunction, the Holocaust of Giants. Because what we're going to show you unequivocally, and I know Tom's going to be talking about this isn't by coincidence. So if you're talking about the Tower of Set, you're talking about all the different, and they even have one called the Tower of Zoroaster. And Zoroaster is a guy that was, a lot of people believe that his name was Joseph, had been from Joseph, because he had a god that was higher in the heavens than the sun god named Ra, and that he knew what the dream meant. So there's a lot of syncretism, but what's astonishing to me, and I think if I had to tell you, and this, by the way, this the passage about Pasha and everything is in my book. Tom wrote the second half of the book. I wrote the first half of the book, and it's unequivocally, it tells you why the Smithsonian has done the Pasha. Now, why would the Egyptians want to cover that up?
This is a great place to stop. We're right up against the top of the hour network break. When we come back, we're going to jump right into why you and Tom believe that the Smithsonian has hidden evidence all throughout history of giants. Folks, we're talking with Derek Gilbert and Steve Quayle. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Reporting on what the mainstream media won't, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Exposing the New World Order, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. Stand by. Doug and Joe will be back shortly. Putting truth into action, you're listening to the Hagman and Hagman Report, streaming live on the Global Star Radio Network. Please stand.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour on this Thursday edition of the Hagman Report. Steve Quill from stevequill.com and Derek Gilbert from skywatchtv.com are our guests. Just before the break, Steve, you were going into a thought about the Smithsonian Museum and their history of suppressing evidence and hiding evidence of giants. You want to pick up right where you left off?
Yep, it's really important that people understand that it's an Orwell statement. George Orwell, who was pretty well connected to the inner crew, that they who control the past basically write the future, control the future. I believe what God is doing is showing his people, just like he delivered Moses and the children of Israel out of Egypt, when all of Pharaoh's army, so will he deliver the people that are obedient and praying and trusting him. It was when the money failed that obviously people just had to go. They had to flee Egypt because there was nothing left now except God's provision. God fed them with the manna, and I love this because it's true. When God feeds you, he knows what's nutritionally sound. I'm convinced, Derek, that God knew the nutritional supplemental value of manna. I am convinced that in one wonderful heavenly angel food wafer, you didn't need 400 bottles of every amino acid vitamin. I'm not mocking it, but I would just say this: with manna's inherent creator would come the nutrition that would be beyond description. Now, getting to quail, i.e., obviously, when the children of Israel were unhappy with the manna, they wanted meat, and God sent them the meat. But unfortunately, people couldn't stomach the meat, and they started to vomit. It's kind of like the truth. People cannot handle the truth. Too much is forgive me, sometimes too little is too much for them to digest. I also want to say this, that, Joe, the reason that the Smithsonian, and I wrote this in my book on True Legends, listen, unless you understand who set up the Smithsonian, James Smithson, who was the head of it, John Wesley Powell. John Wesley Powell even is in his own records talked about giant mummies and everything else, and the idea simply that everyone's got to get across and get through is that the history you've been taught is a total bloody, repulsive lie. And I will say this, Derek, I believe that the forbidden fruit is now and will yield its ultimate harvest and the damnation of billions. The scripture, now, that's a powerful statement. I just got that at the moment. But the forbidden fruit, the same stuff that was offered to Adam and Eve, look at how many people have suffered under original sin, and look at the price the human race has paid. But more importantly, look at the price that God's Son, Jesus Christ, has paid to redeem us. And if you understand what it truly meant, if I understand, I get bits and pieces like most people do, what a wonderful, loving, glorious God that obviously, was wanting his family back, because God used to walk with Adam in the cool of the day. Hey, any of us would take that deal in a heartbeat. But the point being is that the forbidden fruit is now yielding its ultimate harvest and damnation. Now, what is the quintessential goal of Google? What's the quintessential goal of total spy apparatus over the entire world? Doug, what's the final, at the end of the day, no matter what the technology, what is the word that is used to basically define it all?
To define specifically what, Steve? I'm not sure.
The surveillance net?
Surveillance?
Surveillance?
Well, the eye in the sky, but I'm...
Well, I'll make it easy. I'm sorry. Pay attention, grasshopper. No, I'm just kidding.
No,
grasshopper. Yeah. Today, I say to you, you have two teachers. Both are trying to give left brain and right brain information that you need. So pay attention, grasshopper. I'm just kidding.
No, that's
so
fine.
anyway, the thing is that we're at this junction where the ultimate control is information. It's if you will, it's the devil's promise in the form of a lie being bought by the technocrats who are trying to live forever apart from God, claiming we will not have this man Jesus rule over us, and all of the things that Derek and myself and Dr. Lake and L.A. Marzulli and all of us, Timothy Alberino, Anselm P. Rambla, all of us who are going to be at Branson, you're going to see a central theme and a central chord. And guess what the good news is, everybody? This is what all you that go, I don't know why they talk about this stuff. This has nothing to do with salvation. It has everything to do with salvation. If you're believing a lie and you're living in the lack of knowledge, God's declaration of the will is his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Remember this, the occultists, they smile, they smirk, they mock, they scorn, they scoff, and they know this stuff is true. It's just the Christians that should walk in the light as he is in the light and have fellowship with one another in the light do not want to deal with reality, because with reality brings responsibility. With responsibility brings ultimate accountability before the living God. So what we're doing, what Derek and I and others are doing, is trying to show you the tapestry. We're trying to put the thread that God has given us individually, and now he's bringing it together collectively. And Derek, I'm going to turn it right back to you. I'm kind of interested in to see how God weaves this all together, because I think the tapestry that God is the tapestry of redemption, and it's going to set people free. It's going to empower people, because the days that we're coming into, it's impossible for the mind of humans to embrace it. But God's given us a little bit at a time, and revealing much more than much more than he ever has in history. And that's what, Derek, you and I and all the men that are going to be there get to be, I guess you'd say, fingerprints in the creative and the redemptive purpose of Jesus Christ. Go ahead, sir.
It's an honor to be a part of this, because, as I've said before, Sharon and I started down this path 15 years ago by listening to your radio program and hearing Tom Horn and hearing reports from Doug Hagman, and it was my honor to be able to bring Doug onto my secular talk radio program back in 2006, 2007, because I respect the work that you all have been doing. That was really, really a blessing to me, and so to find myself here, where I'll be the first one up on that stage in front of a sold out Mansion Theater in Branson is kind of mind blowing, because it's certainly not the career path I envisioned when I started off in my radio career back in 1980. But I wouldn't be doing anything else right now. God had this all laid out from the beginning, and that's really humbling when you think about we are exactly where he wants us right now. Assuming we're doing what he wants, and I think I am. So, but God saw this, and for this time, he is bringing all of us together for this purpose in this particular conference. The enemy is throwing sand in our eyes. You made a really good point, Steve, and this is something that, in fact, Josh and I address in our forthcoming book right from the introduction. Why are we talking about these fringe topics? Why are we talking about ancient history and alternative history? Why are we talking about extraterrestrials and aliens? This is something that L.A. Marzulli has talked about an awful lot, as you and Tom have as well over the years. It's because when you start looking at the data, and again, I keep going back to secular data to try to show to the secular world, people who have not yet accepted Jesus Christ, look, we're not making stuff up here. We're not just pulling stuff out of thin air to set ourselves up as somehow more learned than everybody else. We're trying to sound a clarion call, and we're going to use the information that secularists, people without a Christian agenda, are putting out there. They're just not analyzing it correctly. We don't dispute the evidence. We just dispute the analysis of the evidence. When the National Geographic Channel launched its own version of the Ancient Aliens or UFO Chasers or Hunters or whatever the program was called back in 2012, they commissioned a survey of American adults, and they found that something like 37% of American adults believe that we're being visited by extraterrestrials right now. and that over 70% of American adults are at least open to the idea or believe that there is evidence that we have been visited by extraterrestrials. All right? Now, when you look at the research that the Barna Group has done over the years, George Barna and his organization, reputable research group, they focus on finding out what Christians believe versus what we say we believe. I mean, we've heard it said that, 70+% of Christians. What does that word mean when somebody says they are a Christian? What do they actually believe? And when you start drilling down into it, find out that people who say they are Christian don't actually believe what you're supposed to believe according to the Bible. I mean, according to George Barna, only 9% of American adults have a biblical worldview, which is defined as belief in 6 very key points, tenets of Christian doctrine: that Jesus lived a sinless life, was born of a virgin, literally rose from the dead, that Satan is a literal entity and not just a concept or a force. This is Christianity 101. And so if you agree with those 6 key points, then according to Barna's research, then you have a biblical worldview. But again, all of these are really basic Christian doctrines. So on one hand, 37% of Americans believe in ET. Only 9% of American adults believe in the God of the Bible. But the thing that's really disturbing is when you dig a little deeper, the people who claim to be evangelical Christians, people who say they are born again, only 17% of them have a biblical worldview. So we're living in a world where people in America are 4 times more likely to believe in ET than to believe in the God of the Bible. That's why we talk about this stuff, because it's fascinating to consider that there might be something greater out there, because that's how we're wired. That's how we humans are wired. We are wired to tap into a greater spiritual truth. There is only one truth, and that is Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. Like I said before, the enemy doesn't care what you believe, which is why some of the ancient myths make no sense. I mean, Baal was Set, but Set was Typhon. Baal was also Zeus, and Zeus fought this nasty battle against Typhon. How does that work? It doesn't, but the enemy doesn't care. They want you confused. Christianity and our Jewish brothers and sisters, the only religious faith on the planet that have actual eyewitness testimony corroborated by the effect that this spiritual truth had on their lives. The apostles were willing to die for what they had seen. Now, there are skeptics who will say, well, yeah, the guys on 9/11 died for what they believed too. Yeah, they died for what they believed. But the apostles had seen, they were in a position to know if the resurrection of Jesus Christ was a lie, if it had been faked, if it was just a story, if Jesus never claimed to be God. They were in a position that no rational person is willing to die for something that they know to be untrue. And that's not what we see in the lives of the apostles. They all of them, except for the apostle John, died violently for what they believed. In fact, that was what convinced me to accept that the Bible was a true and accurate record of the eyewitness accounts of the life and ministry, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. In the Gospel of John, we're told that even his brothers did not believe in him. John 7, verse 5, I believe. I might be 5:7. I keep getting those two mixed up. Anyway, his brothers didn't believe in him, and yet Paul recounts in 1 Corinthians 15 that James, who we know from the history written by Josephus, who was a Pharisee. Josephus was not trying to sell Christianity to anybody. Josephus recorded that James was martyred around the year 62 AD. Why? Because he believed that Jesus was God. His half-brother, this kid that he grew up with, who said, before Abraham was, I am, and he was willing to die rather than recant. Something happened between the time Jesus, he and his brothers encountered Jesus and said, hey, you need to go down to the Feast of Tabernacles instead of preaching up here in Galilee, for even his brothers didn't believe in him. And yet later, 30 years later, he was willing to die. Why? Because in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul puts his finger on it. The risen Jesus first appeared to Peter and then to James. That might do it. So we've got the evidence. We've got the eyewitness testimony and the impact of what they saw on their lives. No other faith can make that claim. And yet, people in America are 4 times more likely to believe we're being visited by extraterrestrials. And hey, maybe they hold the answers to the big questions that have perplexed us since the beginning of time. Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where do we go when we die? Blavatsky and Crowley and Bailey and Grant and Aquino with his Temple of Set. They're happy to provide answers. Oh, with proper spiritual training and discipline, we can ascend. We can contact the spirit realm. We can transform. We can transcend the limits of our biology. And then on the other side, you've got the people who are turning science into a religion. People like Kurzweil, Dr. Raymond Kurzweil, and the transhumanist movement, who want to overcome death through technology so that mankind can live forever. This was the point of the documentary film produced by Tom Horn, Inhuman, the next and final phase of man is here. It is a science fiction religion. In fact, Sharon and I talk about this. We do a weekly video program called Sci Friday, released every Friday. You can find it on YouTube. It's also on the Skywatch TV channel on Roku and the Apple TV channel for Skywatch TV. We talk about this today, and you'll see it tomorrow. What would happen if science and technology, if computer programmers through artificial intelligence, if robotics engineers through technology that allows us to replace our flawed biological parts with technology, turn us into bionic shells to plug our computer into which we've uploaded our minds into, could live forever. What would happen if we could create the equivalent of, say, Westworld? And I don't know if you've seen that program. I wouldn't recommend it for children, certainly, because it's on cable. There's a lot of gratuitous stuff but it's, I think, instructive in what the Earth would become if we're able to overcome death without regenerate hearts. The transhumanists and the New Agers believe this would be heaven on earth, that we would then, be free from pain, free from suffering, free from our worldly cares. No more pain, no more death. Look, the only thing that restrains the behavior of some of us walking on the planet today is the risk-reward calculation. Gee, I might get shot if I try to do this to this other person. I might go to jail if I get caught. But hey, if you live forever, if you can't be hurt, if you have virtually godlike abilities because of technology, what is to restrain you from doing anything you conceive of? You can, and again, this is not a new idea. I'm not coming up with something radical here. Read the book of Deuteronomy and look at what God was telling Moses. Don't do this, and tell the Israelites, don't do that. God wasn't inventing despicable, twisted, perverse things for the Israelites not to do. He wasn't creating them and then saying, don't do this. He said the Canaanites are doing these things, and the Amorites are doing these things. The people who are living in the land I've chosen for you are doing these things, and that's why I'm going to push them out of your way. That's what Earth would be like if we were to somehow overcome death and suffering through, whether it's through technology or through some occult working, to imbue us with superhuman, occult, paranormal powers. We would create hell on earth. And yet that's what they're working toward. That's why we talk about this stuff, because so many people are fascinated by the concept of engaging directly with the spirit realm, whether it's through meditation, which, by the way, is being pushed on our school kids these days. They're calling it mindfulness. It helps them to relax. It frees them of their aggressive behavior. It opens them up to the spirit realm where there are entities just waiting to pop inside little Johnny, is what it does. Whether it's through drugs, you've got researchers who want to use DMT or psilocybin to open up the third eye and engage directly with the spirit realm. In fact, there's a fellow who I've interviewed on my podcast years ago, Dr. Rick Strassman, who conducted experiments with the DMT molecule, who believes that this is the chemical by which the Hebrew prophets spoke directly to God. And he wants to do more research in order to see exactly how we calculate the correct dosage, apparently, so that we can all talk to God. You know, there's a reason that God said, don't do this. Don't try to communicate with the dead. Don't try to communicate with the spirit realm. It's because, as the Apostle John warned us, not every spirit is from God. And apparently we humans are pretty bad at discerning which are which is why God had to tell us, don't do this for your own good. Don't do this. That's what the occult realm wants to do. And frankly, that's what the transhumanists want to do. Even though they may deny the existence of God, the existence of the spirit realm, what they want to do is answer the big questions that God has already answered for us in his word. Where we come from, why we're here, and what happens to us when we die. We've got those answers. But as Steve said, because those answers require some accountability on our part, they're not the answers we want. And so we look to the skies. Maybe ET has the answer. Maybe I can contact ET if I take this chemical. Maybe if I meditate, I can hear from ET or some other spirit out there who will guide me on my path to enlightenment so that I can overcome this dreary existence into which I've been cursed. Well, I'm sorry, but that's a lie from the enemy. And like I said, that's why we talk about the things that we do. This has been a very, very long game. It's the subtitle of my book, Satan's Psyops from Eden to Armageddon. From the very beginning, Satan put that lie out there. You can be just like God. The lie works, and that's why the enemy keeps throwing it out there in front of us, because we keep falling for it. It's just now today in the 21st century, it has kind of a science fiction gloss to it.
Well, one of the things that, Derek, as you know, that Tom Horn and I and others have been warning about, and this is critical, Doug, is that Christians are embracing transhumanism. For a Christian to say that they're embracing transhumanism is like saying, God, you didn't do it right, or God just kind of wound it up, stepped out, as Francis Schaeffer wrote, stepped out of the universe, and, the clock just runs on its own. And to those who think you're God, I'll invite you any place. I want to see any of you create with your words, let there be light. Now, obviously, if somebody's monitoring it with a microphone and they get a plasma burst from a space-based weapons platform, that could be possible. But, it's fascinating to me that everything that's going on, and Derek, I want to deal, too, with, what is it, Westworld, the idea. What's the name of the new series? Is it Westworld?
Westworld, yeah, the one with Ed Harris and
Yeah. I think, and that's
Anthony
off
Hopkins.
of the old. I remember the Yul Brynner one. But what's interesting to me, if you get to the heart of that, and I don't recommend anybody watch it, okay? And there are times I walk out of the room, and I really do. The idea is, isn't it interesting how the robots have to appeal to the most base human, rebellious, simple attitudes, whether it's lust, whether it's orgies, whether it's murder? You don't see those robots out preaching the gospel and other robots being converted. Now, I know I'm taking a little too far on that, but the point is, and I don't know, Derek, did you hear the night? Probably not. I was on, I think, Doug, I was on with you, what was it, a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and the word sex came in, and the Lord, I saw the S and extinction of the human race, okay? In other words, Satan's extinction, sex, of the human race. And in essence, that's the bottom line. Jesus said, okay, for all you guys that can't embrace anything beyond, well, you guys don't talk about salvation and God's four spiritual laws. We're taking you into the heart of God that designed everything. And showing you how the mind of Satan is at war and opposition, because enmity, God said we're going to be at war with the seed of the serpent. We're going to be at war. And you can't lay down and say, I'll be nice to you, Satan, if you'll be nice to me. It doesn't work that way. Yet, intellectually, I would say this, and Derek, I don't know what you'd say, but I would say the majority, and I won't tell you the numbers in my estimation, but the majority of that which calls itself or claimants to the Christian faith, and you just gave the statistics of, what was it, only 17% of them calling themselves
17%
evangelical?
of people who, right, have a biblical worldview.
Yep.
Now, does that mean they're not saved?
Right.
The other 83%, I don't know that for a fact, but it does mean that there are some ideas floating around in the heads of people who believe they're Christians and followers of Christ that don't square with what's in the Bible.
Right, and many will come to me in that day saying, Lord, Lord, didn't we do this? Didn't we do that? And he'll say, depart from me, ye who work iniquity or lawlessness, I never knew you. Again, Doug, I think the most profound revelation that I can give everyone that I've even gotten in the last couple of years of being on talk radio is this. It's not enough to say, you know Jesus. I hear people say, well, you know, I know Jesus. And their smugness and their attitude tells me, no, they don't. Now, someone says, well, you can't judge. I can say this. Jesus said this. In that day, many will come and say, didn't we in your name do all the things, cast out demons, heal the sick? And he'll say, depart from me. I never knew you. The more critical answer is to get on your knees in repentance and say, Lord, know me, please. You know, try me, search my heart. I come to you. Reveal yourself to me. Then when your eyes are upon him is when, obviously, you can overcome sin. And this is to Randy Conway, when, you know, probably in my opinion, Randy's going to be putting out his book on poetry. And I don't believe in, and look, Randy's my friend, but I won't flatter any man. But that guy has a gift, and if most people knew how to read Hebrew, so many of the Psalms and so much of the Bible rhymes, and it is a perfect meter. It is a mathematical, I don't think people know this, Derek, you do, but it is a mathematical formula that enables words to rhyme in meter, in length, and in phonetic, similarity. So it's fascinating. Randy will be, I believe, at Branson. Well, I know he will. And I said, Randy, bring your books, because in my opinion, if you want a wonderful revelation of a man who's got a heart towards God, put into the most anointed poetry I've ever seen in my life. And I've been walking with Jesus, stumbling with Jesus, and Jesus has been picking me up for 45 years, okay? But the point that I'm trying to make is this. God is now in the background of most claimants. And my definition, Derek, of a claimant is somebody that claims to be a Christian, but they don't have the slightest clue what it is to put that into practice. And I would say, someone said, judge not, lest you be judged. No, I'm allowed to see if there's any fruit. I'm allowed to see, you know, how many people is a passion to bring others to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ in a person's life. And quite candidly, everybody might be surprised at this. People around the world that hear Hagmann and Hagmann, rebroadcast, iCast, wherever it goes, and Doug, you know this to be true, people can be in the most remote part of the Australian outback, the mountains of New Zealand, Siberia, Antarctica, believe it or not. There are people there that are listening to this now. All over the world, Paris, France, obviously, the British Isles, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. I got enough people with, Scandinavian names. I would say, boy, I wish your fellow countrymen would get the blood of the Vikings and stand up and fight against evil. And I don't know if you saw this, Derek, and this is really, Doug, I believe you talked about it, but the Danes that believe they're going to stop jihad by hugging a Muslim? Is that
in Denmark?
I think that's correct.
In Denmark, they adopted a hug a terrorist policy.
Yeah. And in Sweden, I'm sorry, this may be offensive to some people, but the Swedish women believe that the best way to protect themselves from rape is to allow themselves to be consensually raped or giving consenting sex to the invading hordes. I make this statement. There will be coming a time before people finally get it, where they will kiss the headsman's axe, A-X-E, probably another word that rhymes with that, before it cuts their head. Can you see this, Doug? Can you see this, Derek? They will be so mind-controlled. It's no different than going out and blowing yourself up with a bomb belt or whatever, and they will literally embrace the swordsman's axe or sword or knife because they'll think they're doing it for a noble and holy cause. Just ask yourself this. Why doesn't the guy cutting off the heads allow his head to be cut off? Because he knows better. Yet what I'm saying is this. The capitulation to evil is absolutely beyond any sane or even rational rational inquiry, and it's come down to the fact that we are literally seeing the doctrine of devils. We're seeing Skynet was a word. Thank you, Kim. In the Terminator movies, and now we've got the World Wide Web, we've got the Internet, and we've got now an intranet, and very soon we'll have a body net by nanobots in our bodies. Pretty soon we'll have, if you will, a giant umbrella listening to our thoughts, trying to control our thoughts, and people say, where is God in all this? I'll tell you where he is right now. He's letting two people right now talk, Derek Gilbert, Steve Quayle, and others. I'm not just saying we're the only ones. I'm just saying right now to warn you. And God said his people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Jesus commended the children of this world being wiser in their generations than children of light. And again, I'm sorry. And I guess my question is still, Lord, why are we a bunch of dumb sheep? Because the Lord said, all we like sheep have gone astray. And so the wolves come out. Right now, they've got glaring neon wolf wear, they don't have their loins girt with truth. They've got their chest with an apron. They've coming out with a knife and a fork, salt and pepper in their eyes and going, you look good to me, sheep. And listen, the idea of us being sheep, God is a shepherd. I don't mind that. But listen, unless sheep get wise and go into the mountains I'm likening to the presence of the living God. And in Montana, I'm flying around and there's all these mountain sheep, regal rams, but they're out of the reach of the wolves. The wolves can't go that high, and they're not sure-footed enough. If your feet are shed with the preparation of the gospel, part of the armor of God in Ephesians 6, you're going to be able to walk in high places, and you'll have hinds feet in high places. And what that literally means, and in case most of you have never seen this happen, how any mountain goat or sheep can be so sure-footed that on literally a vertical face, they can jump from one small, protruding rock, and I'm not talking ledges, I'm talking individual stones, and not go down thousands of feet is astonishing to me. And guess what, Derek? They always know before they go the way back. They just don't go blindly into the future, but they always know the way back. And I've watched that. And so the point is that, actually I got it on, shot over camera. It's so close that basically you want to reach out and, lay down the hairs on the goat or the sheep's back that are standing up. So the point being is that it's critical that people start to pour into Jesus like they never have before in their lives. Now, look, I know, and Derek, you speak at a lot of them, and I know there are conferences all over the place, but I want you to sign up for live streaming, because at some point, when we get to a certain number on live streaming, we either got to pay as much money as we did for, let's say, 1,000, even if we go 200, 300, so over that. So, I don't know where it's going to be, but I want everybody to pray. If you can't be there, or if you miss the opportunity, look, you'll be able to live stream for, what is it, $89. You'll be able to, if you want, to get DVD presentations. People are coming from all over the world, ladies and gentlemen, all over the world. They signed up early. I'm sorry if you missed your opportunity, and God knows, I can't do anything. So please, if you can say, put a good word into me, or somebody says, will you put a good word into Pastor Langford? And I talked to David Langford today and said, a lot of people, Steve, want me to put in a good word to you to get them on. I said, David, tell them we're locked out. We cannot. The mansion has the absolute seating limit. We have achieved that. And I'm believing, Derek, that everything that you are going to speak about, that Dr. Michael Lake, that all of the mainstream speakers are going to get things that they could have never gotten on the radio. Look, it's one thing to talk on the radio about astrocatastrophism. It's one thing to talk about, Egyptians in the Grand Canyon. And by the way, I want you to address something. Some of the oldest figurines in the world have cone heads. It looks like literally lizard people with cone heads, right. And even some of the Aztec, Mayan, and Incan, and it has nothing to do with head binding. That precedes head binding. What are you finding out on that? The typical ones. They're standing up, they're bipedal, and they're reptilians.
Right. In fact, I mentioned and included some of that in my book, The Great Inception. Included an artist representation of one that's at the museum at the University of Pennsylvania now. The scholars call them Ophidian figurines. Ophidian. That's just a fancy word that means snake-like, because they've got a serpentine appearance. And if you've searched on the web for these lizard-like or figurines, they're from the Ubaid culture, UBAID culture, which predates the rise of the city-state of Uruk, which was the heart of Nimrod's kingdom. And I included that in the book because of the relationship, and this is part of what I'll talk about in Branson, between the look of these figurines and the way we think the Nakash may have looked. And it's speculative because the Bible doesn't tell us anything except that it's translated. It's a word that is translated often as serpent in the Bible. The Hebrew word in Genesis 3, translated as serpent, is Nakash. But it's also used interchangeably a few times in the Bible, in the Old Testament in particular, with the word seraph, which is the root word of seraphim. So you've got this idea that based on the other connotations of those two words, that you've got these divine, by which I mean supernatural, entities that look like snakes, or at least snake-like, like these little figurines, who were perhaps luminous, glowing, like polished brass, which is a description that is applied to some of the angelic messengers seen by patriarchs and prophets in the Old Testament. So that is my speculation as to why there are so many of these figurines at this one particular place. And again, I'll talk about where these were found and why it's significant, the time period in which they were found, and the relationship perhaps to the practice of head binding among humans, which was universal in the time before the flood, especially in the ancient Near East, which are basically the lands of the Bible, Mesopotamia. Everybody there was turning their kids' heads into these little pointy head shapes. And why, we don't really know for sure. All we can do is look at the evidence and guess and compare it against the Bible and see if it is at least consistent with what we find in the Bible. And I think what we have come up with and what we conclude is at least consistent. But what amazed me, Steve, in this research was that it goes back, using the timeline of secular archaeologists, it goes back to 10,000 BC. Now, I don't know that the Earth actually is that old, but I'm using this secular research to make a point that it's consistent with the narrative in the Bible and this long history of rebellion between these small g gods, these created beings who rebelled against the authority of their creator and set themselves up as gods over the pagan nations. You mentioned something I want to come back to because it's really disturbing. And again, this is something that Sharon and I were talking about on the episode of Sci Friday that we will put out for broadcast tomorrow. As we were talking about the technology, the robotics technology and artificial intelligence, basically the 21st century scientific method to try to realize the goal of the lie that Satan gave, that the serpent gave to Adam and Eve in the garden, and to become as gods. And you made the comment, maybe I'm taking this too far. Well, I don't think so, and I think I heard you correctly there, but I don't think you are, because a law professor at the Georgetown Law School is actually calling on Congress now to begin regulating robots that are being created to take the place of human companionship. I'm trying to be delicate here. The joke is that.
Are you good at that? I would need to learn how to be delicate, instead of blunt. But continue with your wonderful train of thought there.
Well, technology is driven by a couple of things: war and sex. And this is why I've argued in an article that I wrote for Skywatch magazine a couple of months ago that the spirit of the age that we're living in is Inanna, the ancient Sumerian goddess of sex and war. The military obviously drives technological innovation as we look for better ways to try to defeat our enemies before they can defeat us. But especially now in the computer age, the human sex drive really pushes a lot of technological innovation. A lot of the breakthroughs in video streaming technology, which we're going to use to try to advance the kingdom for God has come about by pornographers trying to find more efficient ways to deliver pornography over the internet. So it's not a surprise when we find out that people in the fields of robotics and artificial intelligence are trying to come up with ways, just like in the television series Westworld, ways to create lifelike robots. There's another television series that we watched, Humans, that we made reference to, which delves into the same topic, creating lifelike robots to fulfill humanity's baser instincts and needs. Prostitution, it's joked, is the world's oldest profession. Well, they're about to be put out of work by robots, just like guys working in Detroit on the factory floor for the big three automakers. But the scary thing is this: it's not just that these robotic, well, let's be blunt, sex toys are going to take the place of the old blow-up inflatable sex dolls of 20 years ago. It's that pedophiles and men who want to live out rape fantasies are commissioning robots for those purposes. And this law professor at Georgetown Law wants Congress to step in and say, look, there's evidence that suggests that guys who use toys to fulfill these dark desires are actually more likely to then go and act them out on real people later. So, technology can be a wonderful thing because it makes it possible to have this conversation from, 3 different points inside the United States, for people all over the planet to take part in the Branson Conference through live video streaming. But it's also making it possible for a pedophile to have a lifelike doll that moves, behaves, and acts like a 10-year-old boy to fulfill his dark, perverse fantasies.
If I may add just one thing here, Mr. Gilbert and Steve, for all the people who have said that Pedogate, Pizzagate is nothing more than some sort of myth, when you hear something like this, you talk about the intellectual bankruptcy of those individuals. It absolutely astounds me that anyone can doubt the veracity of the information that has come out from citizen investigators about these issues. When you are talking about this issue, which is just and Steve, I remember you talking about this. You headlining this a decade and a half ago, and people laughed at you.
15 years.
And to those people, I just say, look what's happening right now, and it's unbelievable. It just the lack of intellectual. Well, I'm not going to go there. It's just, there's so much wrong with this.
Hey, Derek, I'm gonna add one word and let you take it away. Or I guess a sentence in this is that I put up on my website a new term, and I believe this, snuff bots. And snuff bots go along with what you're saying. A snuff, basically film, or the word snuff, means to kill, to murder, or to literally engage in the act of murder and sex accordingly. Can you imagine, if you will, let me just call them a sex bot. And the sex bot is reading your mind, and I'm talking about with the technology that we've talked about, you've talked about, I've been on your show, or not your show, but, your show. Good night.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been on your show. It's time for me to repay you, and I've enjoyed it. By the way, I got a new name for you. You're going to love this, okay? I call you the Encyclopedia of Gilbertica. Because I don't think anybody, you got that. Gilbert's his last name, and Britannica, Gilbertica, another attempt at humor. But I don't think I've ever been on any show where I feel so free that I can go in any direction, know that you at least can ask intelligent questions. And I just want to commend you for that, because God has used you kind of as a data repository. And so, it's cool to see the release now of all of the, you're a very clinically processing, thinking individual. And so it's neat to see that, each part of the puzzle piece that God's giving to different people, now he's fitting together. The scripture says jointly fit together. I can tell you, I've tried to move puzzle pieces for a lot of years, and all it did was, can't resist, put me in a predicament and puzzled me, okay? Now God's moving the puzzle pieces, and he's putting it all together. So go ahead, snuff bots. And I think that what people don't understand is just as you can have a female femme fatale, just as you can have a hitter, a shooter, an assassin, you can have, kill bots, murder bots. You can actually see Europe, by the way, Doug, and I think, Derek, you mentioned this. Europe is embracing sextitudes, okay, or robotitudes. I don't know what to call whorebots. Let's call them whorebots, okay? Another word for you, Doug. I've invented more words on your show. So they're embracing the whorebots to the point where the working women, those who are, a human being, prostitutes, and, the word whore, are complaining because their business is drying up. And meanwhile, men are lining up to visit these places. So, it is such a turn of events, but it wasn't unforeseen, Doug. Thank you. 15 years ago, I wrote Genetic Armageddon. And all the stuff that was in there, people would not receive it. It's not that they couldn't. Meanwhile, behind the back of the laboratories, people are working overtime on this. So, Derek, I want to thank you for bringing it up and continue, because this is critical. There are Christians saying that this is a good thing, not necessarily the sex bots, but that the transhumanism that will live forever. Go ahead, sir.
Well, and that's the thing that astonishes me as well. And by the way, thank you for your kind words. Coming from you, I take that as very high praise, and I am honored. It is astonishing to me that as Christians, when we are promised a glorified body, that there's a day coming when we will be, that these flawed shells that we have will be replaced with something that works according to the designer's original specifications. Why would we trade that for something where, you're a mechanical, cyborg, when you're being run like software on a machine, where the blue screen of death actually means the blue screen of death. I can't fathom this, and the theological justifications that I hear. To me, it just comes back to the way you said it, Steve. God's design wasn't good enough, and so now we have to take it from here. God wants us to take it over because he can't get us across the goal line. The illogic of that mindset boggles me, because it says, just for one thing, I mean, what happened to all of those generations of people who died in Christ for the last 2,000 years, who weren't capable of a bionic upgrade, who weren't able to be bionically upgraded? It's, for one thing, it denies the power and the omnipotence of God. Secondly, whether they realize it or not, it's based on a very flawed understanding of human nature. I mean, the Bible tells us the heart of man is wicked. It's evil. We see it in the headlines every day. To think that somehow, if the technology could be developed, and I don't believe it will ever be, but if it could be developed to overcome death, where we could radically extend our life expectancies to virtual infinity, live forever. Why do they think this is going to be handed out to everybody? First of all, it's going to further stratify. The haves will have more, and the have-nots will be, have even less. Secondly, why should everybody have it? I mean, if we had developed this technology, say 80 years ago, should Adolf Hitler have been allowed to live forever? Should Joseph Stalin have been upgraded so that he could live forever? How about Pol Pot? How about the people in Rwanda who committed the massacre of the Tutsis? It makes no sense whatsoever. It's eugenics writ large, self-directed evolution, which is, some of the transhumanists, by the way, actually use that exact phrase. I don't know if they realize, but that's exactly the same phrase that was used by the eugenicists of the 1920s and 1930s, who developed the procedures that the Germans took back to Hitler and develop the final solution, self-directed evolution.
And judgment avoidance, right? I mean, ultimately.
Basically, yes, exactly. We don't want to have to deal with pain or suffering. Well, you know what? That's kind of what makes us human, all right? Overcoming struggle and the promise that God has given us, that we've got a day ahead when all of the trials and tribulations of this life will be as nothing. And yet, if you call yourself a Christian and say, yeah, that's all right, but I think we can do better in the laboratory, you're not on the same page. You're not a Christian, I don't believe, in any meaningful sense. That's maybe harsh, but that's where I stand on that issue. But I think coming back to this.
Well, that's not harsh. That's soft.
Yeah.
That's true. You can't call that which God has created and sent his son, who Colossians 1:16-17 said God put in actual the overseeing of creation, all things that we see, and you know that, Derek. I mean, that has to be said, Derek, because and whether they're Christians or not, I would say this: if you deny the basis of the tenets of faith, if you believe you are God, you have swallowed the lie of ye shall be as gods, and therefore the judgment that awaits and this is harsh, but it's true, the judgment that awaits the fallen angels, Lucifer. And by the way, you know this. Not enough people know this, but Lucifer, they always argue with me, he's not Satan. Well, Lucifer was absolutely, Ezekiel 28 says, the anointed cherub. So there's a whole different level of hierarchy. And so if everybody wonders, well, why don't some of these fallen angels rebel? Because evidently against even him, the point is they've lost their ability to do so. And I'm not saying they ever would, but what I'm saying is that we do err that we do not know the power of Scripture, we do not know the God of creation, and we do not believe in God's wonderful presentation of His Son to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and what it means to be able to repent and be forgiven. Wow, what a thing is that? Go ahead, you can close it out too, Derek.
Well, and just to very briefly circle back to the references to the television series Westworld, which is a HBO series. And again, as Steve said, if you're going to watch it, be just advised it's an adult program. It's on a cable network, and it's going to show you things that you don't want your children to see. Okay, don't watch it for the titillation factor. Watch it for the depravity, because that's a picture of where humanity will go. There are humans that go to this park to interact with these humanoid robots who are very lifelike for the express purpose of gratifying their basest sexual desires, but also for, as Steve called them, enjoying the sensation of snuffing out another life. The problem is you get to a certain point where you realize, well, that wasn't really real, because that's just a robot. I can just kill all of the ones that I want, and they can't hurt me because that's how they're programmed. That level of depravity is where we would be if the transhumanist movement gets their wish and transcends death, where, okay, I can hurt this guy, but it's not really going to hurt him because, we've got the technology to fix him and he'll keep on living. It would become hell on earth. It would not be heaven on earth to overcome pain. And I've got nothing against using medicine and technology to improve quality of life. My dad had an artificial knee, said it was great. So, no problem with that. The problem is that the transhumanists are looking at technology as a means to achieve the lie, ye shall be as gods, to achieve apotheosis, to become virtually godlike in their abilities. But the problem with this, especially if you're a Christian, is that it denies, as we said, the supremacy and the omnipotence, the power of God. And look, there's a day coming, it's been promised to us. And this always chokes me up when I read this, when I realize what this implies, that knowing the end from the beginning as God does, knowing my sinful life and all of the rebellion that each day by thought, word, and deed, I sin against him. As John wrote, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Yet with that, he chose to come to earth and die, the most horrible form of death known to humanity. I mean, crucifixion, there's a reason excruciating entered the English language, because it describes the pain one feels on the cross. It was an excruciating death for our Savior, and yet he chose to do it anyway, knowing my rebellion. And yet there is a day coming when he will introduce us to the divine council, the divine assembly, when we are restored to God's family. You ever wonder why the New Testament has so much language in it that refers to sonship and inheritance? It's because we, like the prodigal son, are one day going to be welcomed back home. Hebrews 2, beginning in verse 10, where it was fitting that he, Jesus, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons and daughters to glory, the Greek word means male and female, sons and daughters to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering, what Christ did for us on the cross. Verse 11, for he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified, that's you and me, all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, the divine assembly, I will sing your praise. Now, this verse means one of two things. It either means he is going to sing God's praise to us as he introduces us to the divine assembly, or he is going to sing our praise to his brothers, the angels who have remained faithful to God. Either way you interpret that verse, and I need to consult some scholars on it to make sure I'm getting it right, but either way, there's a day coming where that's the scene, where we are reintroduced to the Holy Family, the divine council on God's holy mountain. And why would we trade that for the promise of technology? It makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Amen. 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 Gentlemen, we've reached the end of the program. I got to tell you that this is a fascinating 2 hours, man. Steve, ahead of the curve all of the time. Branson sold out, live stream still available. Derek Gilbert, of course, your book, The Great Inception. It's really one of my favorites. I got it right here. And I got my own signed copy, and I want to thank you for that as well.
Got that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all of the books, Steve's books, your books, they fill the gaps, and honestly, it contextualizes what's in the Bible a lot more linear for me. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it really does help me understand past and even present, and not potentially the future as well. So I want to thank you both for everything you do.
My honor.
Thanks, Doug. And people can go on TrueLegendsOfSeries.com, and or they can go on Genesis 6. Genesis 6, and sign up. It's on the website, my website, stevequayle.com, and sign up for live streaming, because to miss this, I think, is going to be a very, it'll be sad, because there's something that's going to happen that's different. And I can only say that because I know what happens when the presence of the Holy Ghost moves in a very demonstrable and transforming way. God bless everybody. Thank you, Derek. Bless you. Thank you, Joe, Doug. Thank you all, the listening audience.
Hey, good night. Good night, Steve. Good night, Derek. Thank you so very much for gracing our program with your presence, your information, your inspiration, indeed. That'll do it for us tonight, Joe.
Don't forget to check out our daily shows, the Doug Hagman Show, 9 to 10 a.m., and the Hagman Daily Show with myself and John, 2 to 3 p.m. Those are available on Blog Talk Radio and all the different podcasting platforms, as well as live on Global Star Radio Channel 3 at the times I mentioned, 9 to 10 for the Doug Hagman Show, 2 to 3 for the Hagman Daily Show. And those have been going strong, and we appreciate any feedback at studio@hagmanandhagman.com. And that'll do it for us tonight on this Thursday edition. We will be back here tomorrow. Until then, stay safe. God bless. Have a great night.
Thank you for tuning in tonight's broadcast of the Hagman and Hagman Report on the Global Star Radio Network. You can join Doug and Joe nightly from 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as they continue to bring you the truth and keep you up to date with the latest breaking news as we enter the close of the age. The Hagman and Hagman Report has been a presentation of the Global Star Radio Network. Thank you for joining us.